One of my favorite things about the way you write is you do a ton of research. I think you read somewhere around 300 books to get the research around writing the laws of human nature, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Which is
It's
insane. I think
well,
it's, yeah.
if you're going to write a book that has that ambition that I mentioned, you better do your research. I don't want people to say, "Well, what's this based on? Is it just your own ideas?" No, it's based on books by neuroscientists, by anthropologists, by people who've studied human behavior for centuries. And I'm compiling all of that incredible knowledge that's now at our fingertips here in the 21st century and
Mm.
sort of putting it all together. So the research is a very important element of all of my books.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's a lot of historical stories that you use, and you provide very specific examples. That's extremely interesting. You kind of you're able to capture people's attention, and you talk about how based on history, how that still affects us as humans in modern times. And you have an interesting approach, which is you have this kind of dark side of looking at how humans are, and but you believe that we can be taught for good in the end. Can you talk a little bit more about that philosophy?
Well, yeah, so many of the qualities, each chapter is basically on a very elemental part of human nature, and there's sort of a negative spin to them. So, for instance, the first chapter is about irrationality, the second chapter is about narcissism, there's chapters about envy, grandiosity, and these are elements that are kind of wired into our nature, into our animal nature, that go back hundreds of thousands of years to our origins as a species. But they're not really the things that created us in our prehistory are not really very relevant to the 21st century. So, for instance, the fact that we're basically emotional animals. We tend to think of ourselves as rational, as intellectual, that we think first, that thinking is the most important element of human nature. But I'm saying no, it's our emotions that govern most of our behavior. And our inability to understand where our emotions come from and why we're feeling a particular way causes us a lot of problems. So I want to turn this around. I want you to become aware of these kind of shadowy, dark elements that lurk in your unconscious, that lurk at other people. And by becoming aware of them, you can turn it around. So, for instance, the fact that emotions tend to govern our behavior, and it's something that's been demonstrated in by economists, for instance, who look at our behavior when we purchase products and how they call this the affective heuristic, that most of our choices in purchasing things are not based on rational thinking processes, but on very primal emotions, which is what marketing people use to manipulate us very well. And so by becoming aware of your own predisposition to react emotionally to things, you can begin to correct that. You can begin to become more aware. You can begin to see what governs your behavior. And then you can start to become more rational in your choices, in your decisions in life. But only if you become aware of the fact that you are essentially irrational can you begin to turn that around. Only if you become aware that you are essentially self absorbed and narcissistic. And I make the point that we like to point our fingers and say, oh, it's the other person who's a narcissist. He or she's aggressive. He or she, they're envious, etc. But I'm trying to say, no, we all share the same nature. We all have these sort of dark tendencies. And it's only by recognizing this in yourself can you begin to change it. Can you begin to turn that irrationality into rationality? You can begin to turn that self-absorption that we are all basically have into what I call empathy, which is the opposite. So awareness is the most critical part, the most important life skill that you can develop. Being more aware of who you are and what governs your behavior gives you the possibility to perhaps change some of these negative patterns in your life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, when I think about those with, I mean, to take it to an extreme form, when you're talking about alcoholic anonymous, the first thing that they ask you to do is to admit that you have an issue and to
Right.
be aware around it, because the idea is when you can admit that you have something that may be wrong with you, whether you can control whether it's your fault or not, it's something that you can start to at least take action towards a solution. And
Right.
I do want to focus on this idea of self-awareness because it seems like it's like this foundational thing that everyone must have in order to really take those things that the laws that you have in the book and apply that to our real life. Um,
Right.
I'm curious to know, what is something that someone can do to gain a greater self of awareness? Is there some sort of tactics that have worked based on people you've worked with or people that have read your book?
Well, it's a great question. The first thing is you have to have the desire to want to change. So most people think, no, I am aware. I know who I am. I know that I'm basically a good person. It's other people that are the problem. And until you're willing to say, no, that some of the problems in my life actually stem from me and not from other people. I have patterns. If you can't take that first little tiny step and look at yourself and admit that maybe you might be the source of some of these bad patterns in your life, then my book won't have any effect on you. So I've done a lot of consulting with people who are very powerful CEOs, political figures, etc. And the number one quality that I've distinguished and that determines whether they're successful or not successful is, are they willing to listen to advice? Are they willing to take criticism? Are they willing to let me tell them what I think is wrong about what they're doing? And I tell you, most people who are in powerful positions don't have that capacity. And it's what limits them in the end. They don't want to look at themselves. They want to continually point fingers at other people. And that's like actually law number one. The fact that we always look at other people as having these qualities. So the first thing is basically an act of humility to say, I have these issues and I want to change. I want to be a better person. I want to be more effective. I want to have better strategies. I want to deal with people better. I've made mistakes. And the thing is, people think that I'm this sort of all-powerful person who wrote these books. I wrote the 48 Laws of Power, etc. And in writing the book, The Laws of Human Nature, I had to come to terms with the fact that me, the writer, I have these qualities. I am irrational. I can be very self-absorbed and narcissistic. I can be prone to feeling envy, etc. So with that first step, then the door opens up. And now you can start taking other steps. You can start observing your behavior in action. So, for instance, you might want to go through a review process and go look at your past and take like a traumatic experience in your work history, where perhaps you were fired or punished and you don't really know why, or you think somebody else was to blame, or it's unfair. Go back and analyze that and see if you can think now with some distance whether there might be a seed in there that you planted in your own behavior, in your own attitude. Not to say that you're completely to blame, but what was the role that you played with your own actions, your own psychology, your own attitude, and analyze that. And then try and notice if there are patterns in your life. Everybody has patterns. That is one of the chapters in the book, Law Number 4, about compulsive behavior. You'll notice that when you make mistakes, like if you make wrong choices in personal relationships, you tend to make the same wrong choices over and over again. So notice certain patterns in the past and begin to understand that that pattern isn't because of the gods, messing with your mind. It's coming from somewhere within. And now, with these sort of an analyzing of yourself, you can begin to understand yourself better and see what might have caused these problems in the past. And that's the only way that you can get out of some of these bad patterns. I could go on and on each chapter, have more advice about how to become more self-aware. A very important element is the ability to analyze your own emotions. That's something you can start to do tomorrow. So you notice it's best to start with powerful emotions like anger. Okay, all of us experience anger in this world and frustration, right? And you'll notice when you're feeling it, you'll tend to blame or externalize it. Oh, that person said something, or they did something, or they messed with me, and that's why I'm angry. And I want you to take a step back. And I want you to see, where does your anger really come from? Does it come from what that person said or did? Or might it have started earlier in the day when somebody else different, like your spouse or your children, or someone else said something that got under your skin, and you're carrying that with you, and then somebody crosses your path and you get angry, but it's not them, it's something prior, or maybe it's something in your past, or maybe it's something in your childhood. So don't just react emotionally and just assume that your anger or your depression or your frustration is real. You have the ability to analyze and see that maybe it's coming from within and maybe you're the source of it. And with that ability to analyze yourself, it's actually one of the most important life skills that you can develop, the ability to look at yourself with a bit of distance and see and analyze why you're feeling a particular way. Those are some of the tips that I would give for beginning this process.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the fascinating things about training yourself and opening yourself up to become more self-aware is that no matter how much you think you're aware of your own emotions and how you react to things, it seems like there's a never-ending quest to continuously to be more self-aware. Even though you think you are at a certain level, there's always new things that you can continuously discover more about yourself. And you brought up this idea of aggression, which is a very common thing that happens, or anger. But you also talk about when you have this idea of being self-aware, you can actually channel it to do something good
Yes.
for yourself. Can you talk a little bit more
Yes.
about that?
Yeah, that's in every chapter, but so, I'm trying to make the case that we all have aggressive energy. It's not that we're violent. Some people are violent. It's just that we have aggressive. We want to push ourselves forward in the world. We want to get things for ourselves. We want to secure our position. We want to secure our own interests. It's an aggressive energy that every human has. It's very natural because we're born in a world that's very insecure, where there's a lot of dangers, and we have to be very careful. And so we're naturally aggressive in trying to assert ourselves. And that aggression can be actually a positive thing. Now, often it's negative if it's played out against people, if you're pushing people around, if you're manipulating them, if you're violating them space, if you're using them. These are aggressive actions that are actually quite negative in the long run, and they're going to turn around and harm you in the end. You're not in control of your own aggressive energy. But that energy is actually a positive thing. You don't want to get rid of it. You don't want to become someone that has no energy. So, for instance, ambition is a very important part of being a human being. We all have ambitions. You notice that when you were a child, you had dreams about what you were going to become. And often you either stay with those dreams or they kind of fade away as you get older. But we all have a desire to be recognized, to prove ourselves, to be successful. And you don't want to be ashamed of that ambition. You don't want to be ashamed of that aggressive energy. It is aggressive. You want to use it. You want to channel it. You want to channel it towards becoming better in your profession. So working really hard and improving yourself at whatever you do, you're using that aggressive energy for something very positive. Let's say you're somebody who feels a lot of anger. There's a lot of injustice in this world. And we're all dealing with that right now with a lot of the protests that are going on in the United States. And I know you've had some of that in Canada as well. I know I feel a lot of anger, and anger was sort of the root of the 48 Laws of Power. I was feeling very angry about the world of Hollywood where I had worked prior to writing that book. And you can do two things of anger. You can let it kind of consume you, and you can let it become an obsessive energy, or you can channel it into something productive. There is a lot of injustice in this world. There is a lot of unfairness. There is a lot of causes that deserve our being need to be changed. So channeling that aggressive energy into a cause which you're trying to improve the world is another very positive way of turning that around. I talk in the book about envy as a very normal human reaction. It's very human to compare ourselves to others. And I tell the reader, think in the course of a day, how often are you comparing yourself to other people? Wow, he's getting more money than his salary is better than mine. Her children are doing better than mine in school. Why is that person getting a raise and not me, etc.? You'll notice that over half of your thoughts are constantly comparing yourself, and particularly in social media that really feeds that. We are looking at people's Facebook or Instagram posts, you go, wow, they're having a great time. Why am I not doing so well? And that envy can turn into something very negative and kind of consume you, or there's a way to turn it around. So instead of comparing yourself to people and acting in a passive aggressive way to harm them, try and see, well, maybe I need to put that energy into becoming better, into actually, through my own actions, proving that I'm superior, that I'm greater, as opposed to cutting other people down. Maybe I can compare myself to people who are less well off than I am, instead of always comparing myself to people who are doing better. And in comparing myself to people who have it worse than me, I can feel some gratitude for where my life is right now. And feeling gratitude is a very positive emotion. So on and on, all of these things can be channeled in a different direction. And the chapter that is the most obvious about that is I talk about a dark side, that all of us have a dark side. It's an energy that we had as children where we were very aggressive and impulsive and always sort of acting out. And then as we get older, we repress it and we try and become a good person, nice and always fitting in. But that dark energy that we had early on, it doesn't go away. We kind of push it down, and it comes out later in life in ways we can't control. Well, that energy actually can be very interesting. You can use it in very positive, productive ways. You can use it to become competitive. A lot of athletes have that dark side, and I talk about the late Kobe Bryant, one of my idols. He had a very powerful dark side, very kind of aggressive energy, and he channeled it into becoming the best basketball player in the world. I can go on and on and on about how you can turn all of these negative qualities around. But that gives you an idea of my approach.
Yeah, yeah, and it's certainly novel because, as you mentioned, I think we're taught in modern society to suppress and repress ourselves from feeling those or even expressing those out in the public, even internally, just because we've developed this habit of not exposing that to ourselves. And it seems like it's like a small mental tweak that you're suggesting, which is instead of going on defense, use that as an offensive way to apply that in other parts of your life. Because it seems like, I know you talked about this, but it seems like envy is an inevitable thing that we just can't get rid of. It's just embedded into our, I guess, our genetics or the way we think since back in the days. Why is that, by the way? Why is envy like a sin that has been embedded in us?
Well, you'd have to go a little bit into the neuroscience about this. The human brain is developed as an instrument for comparing information. So when something comes into our brain, whether optically or however it is, we have to compare it to other information that we've received to determine whether this is something we need to pay attention to. So the brain is this machine for continually comparing information to what has happened in the past and to what we're perceiving in the present. And so we are very much prone by nature to compare anything that we see in the world around us. But when you also add into that, we're an incredibly social animal, that our lives, our future, our survival depend on how we get along with other people, and that we inherited the social animal trait from chimpanzees, from primates who are mostly social as well. And so if our brains are continually primed for comparing, and all of our life and our survival is about dealing with other people, we're going to use that comparing mechanism to continually focus it on other people. Do they have more than we have? Are we doing as well as they are? Do we have as many possessions, as much money, as much power as they have? And then it's very fascinating because they've done studies of chimpanzees, for instance, and they've definitely detected traces of envy in chimpanzee and chimp behavior. So if one chimp is given a bunch of bananas and the others aren't, the others are looking at him very, very negatively and feel a lot of kind of envious energy, etc. So this is something deeply wired into our nature. And in very primitive indigenous cultures, they understood that envy was the most dangerous human emotion of all. They were hyper aware of it, which is why you'll notice in cultures like that, in hunter-gatherer cultures, for instance, if anyone had like a better piece of meat or it was given a gift, they immediately shared it with others because if they kept it, they knew that they were going to pay a price, that maybe somebody would kill them when they were in their sleep. So you had to, if you got a gift, you had to give it immediately to other people. So it's a quality that is so deeply wired in our nature. And the oldest piece of literature that we have, basically, at least in the Western world, is the Old Testament. And so many of the stories in the Old Testament revolve around envy, Joseph and his brothers, etc. Even the story of Cain and Abel. And so these things are so ancient and so rooted in us that we're not even aware of it. Nobody goes around in the world admitting, yes, I'm envious of that other person, because we don't like to admit that emotion. We're always justifying and say, well, they're a bad person. That's why I'm feeling this way. So it's an incredibly prevalent emotion. And one of the things I try and make is it's very primitive, but with social media, it's now incredibly modern because social media is an instrument for feeding and igniting this natural envy that we all feel. Because now we're not only aware of what our neighbors are doing, we're aware of what the whole world is doing, of circles that expand well beyond people that we know. And so it's constantly teasing and tricking us into thinking, why don't I have as good things as other people, etc. So it might be very primitive, but it's something that we're all dealing with now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure if you've read the book by Charlie Munger. He talks about how envy is really one of the most useless sins because it's the only one you can never have fun at. With lust,
Yeah,
at least
exactly.
it's a little bit useful. So with envy, there's a lot of pain and no fun. It's interesting that you point out that we can actually use that as a tool to get what we want. And you mentioned the example of Kobe Bryant as a modern example. I'm curious to know, and maybe it's in parallel, but we're certainly envious of the people that are more successful than us. But for those that are in that position, maybe that are at some level of success, there is this level of imposter syndrome that happens. I've certainly felt it before. And so it's this other side of the equation where some people have this opposite effect where they achieve a certain level of success, but they don't feel like they deserved it. And it can be a very negative way to look at the world that way. How do you think this relates into this whole equation of what we're talking about in terms of envy?
Well, it's there are ways that happen. I've talked to a lot of people who tell me that, and I say, well, let's look at the actual facts here. Let's not get all carried away by this emotion that we have, which is a kind of a form of envy because we're comparing ourselves to others and we're feeling like we don't deserve what we have, right? That I don't really deserve the success I have. You know, it seems fake. And so the thing that you need to do in situations like that, believe it or not, I actually had that feeling 20 years ago when my first book was very successful, because prior to that, I hadn't been very successful. I had been kind of, a bum. I worked in Hollywood, and my parents were beginning to wonder their 36-year-old son hasn't really achieved anything. And then suddenly I had the success, and I'm going, did I really deserve that? I mean, I'm still the same person. Something feels awkward. So it's often with people who are in the first flush of success, and they're not really sure about themselves. So in that sense, you want to be able to do what we talked about earlier and analyze that emotion and go back and see, first of all, in any kind of success in life, there's an element of luck. I had luck. It's not, and that doesn't mean that you don't deserve what you have, but it's good to recognize the factor of luck so you don't get a big head, which would be the opposite of the imposter syndrome, and think that you have the golden touch. But okay, so recognize that there might have been some element of luck, but there was also something that you did that you deserved it, that your actions actually led to this success, and analyze and try and cut the difference between what is real and what is fake, because there's so much hype in our culture and so many people are successful and they don't really seem to deserve it. It mostly seems to be about marketing and and self-promotion. So it's hard to realize what's real and what's not real. But if you are 30 years old and you started a business and the business is doing really well, um, there's probably a reason for that. It probably is because you spent years in your 20s developing skill. Those skills are real, and you've developed experience, and you have some creative energy, and you put it into this task. And yes, other people have helped you, and yes, there's an element of luck. But give yourself a pat on the back and realize that probably a lot of it stems from actions that you've done, and that you're not really an imposter, you know? So it's more about analyzing why you're feeling that way. And I know I felt that way because the success seemed too sudden. And so that might be the root for a lot of people, you know? And I know, for instance, it's weird because I've done this in consulting. I've noticed a lot more women tend to have that feeling than men do. I mean, men definitely have it, but women who are now suddenly, who are, thank God, finally having as much power as we are in being successful in all different businesses and affairs, they've not been socialized and brought up to feel like they are equals, even though they are completely are equals. They've been socialized to think that something is wrong with themselves, that they don't deserve their success. So I notice a lot of women tend to have that. And I go through a process of saying, well, it's not really coming from you, it's coming from the culture. And that's another element that goes into the imposter syndrome. So those would be sort of the things that I would go through in my
Yeah,
analysis of it.
definitely. Yeah, particularly minority women, right? For people that are talking about Black Lives Matter, this is definitely a revolving evolution that's happening as we kind of reach this equal ground. Um, so yeah, it's interesting because I know you talk about this idea of well, yeah, it's certainly that everyone does. It does seem like everything is easy when you see social media and stuff. I know this is part of the thing you talk about in the 40 Laws of Power, which is when you do succeed, make it look easy. And it's I'm sure a lot of people have applied that, it seems, everywhere in social media. It is a difficult thing to go over, and I think on the other side of that is narcissism that you talk about. So it's I guess it's really about balancing this idea of self-love that you have without trying to go too far into the world of narcissism, right? Is there any tips that you have for how people can balance that?
Well, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. The first thing you have to do is realize that you are self absorbed, that you have narcissistic tendencies. I try and take the taint away from it as if it's some sort of ugly stain that's on you, and try and make you realize that there's something in our nature that makes us self absorbed. And I explain how that originates in our childhood. And I go into depth about that so that we're naturally, as we get older, we're naturally focused inward and focused on ourselves and our interests because it's a tough, competitive world out there. And particularly with social media and the smartphone in our hand, we become even more self absorbed and paying even less attention to other people. So, step number one is to get down on your hands and knees and say, yes, I, Sean, yes, I'm me, Robert, I am a narcissist. I am self absorbed. Most of the time in my day to day affairs, I'm thinking about myself. I'm thinking about what I want to say instead of listening to the other person at the table across from me. I'm thinking about what I want to say, what my opinions are, or what happened to me during the day. And it's natural. You don't need to feel guilty or ashamed about it. It's how we all are, right? So if you refuse to take that step, if you refuse to acknowledge that you are self-absorbed, then there's no help right there.
Right.
Okay. That's not to say that there aren't people who are toxic narcissists. And I make the distinction. There are levels. So up here would be empathy, 100%. You pay deep attention to other people. You're completely participating in their thoughts and their words. Down here is kind of where most of us are, where a lot of the times we're really thinking about ourselves. And down here are the toxic narcissists who are always thinking about themselves, who cannot get out of their own shell, who are so fragile and insecure that they can't, everything revolves around them. And for those types of people, it's very difficult. They're going to need some kind of therapy. But for us, more in that middle ground, becoming aware of it, and then sort of just take little steps and realize that the what you want to do is you want to develop your own empathy. And I explain what empathy is, and I explain that as a social animal, as we are gifted with this natural empathy, this ability to enter the thoughts and moods of other people and try and understand their point of view. Babies have incredible ability to figure out, to fathom the moods and thoughts of their mother because their survival depends on it. It's wired into our system to be able to enter into the minds of other people on a very deep level. It's just that you're not developing this muscle. So starting tomorrow, you're gonna take little baby steps, as I'm always promoting. So in a conversation with your spouse or a colleague at work who you talk about with every day, try to catch yourself not listening to them, and try and just take a step back and go, all right, for 10 minutes, I'm not going to be too ambitious. For 10 minutes, I'm going to shut that damn little voice in my head, and I'm going to really listen to them. I'm going to pay deep attention to what they're saying, to their gestures, to their body language, which is another element in the book that I talk a lot about. And you're going to try and glean one piece of information about them that you never realized before. You're going to see something, this person that you deal with every day, by paying deep attention, by really listening, by really focusing on them, you're going to try and find something about them that you never realized before. And in doing that, you'll see the power in this. You'll see that you've been walking around as if you're blind and bumping into things and not paying attention. But when you do, suddenly you understand people's motivations. You understand what they really love, what makes them excited, what their dislikes and dislikes are, what they think about you, for instance, how they react to what you say. Suddenly now you get to see the power in that. And if you glimpse the power in paying attention to other people on a deep level, then you're now motivated to continue this, right? But we don't do these things unless we feel motivated, unless we feel excited. So if you're just told to listen better, it won't mean anything. It'll go in one ear and out the other. But if you feel the sense that your survival in the social world, in your work world, in your family, in your relationship, depends on this empathic quality, now you're motivated to get out of your little hole that you live in and try and really, really focus on other people. And I give other exercises for developing this empathy, which is, to me, the most critical social skill that we can develop.
Now, what are some of the things that we should be looking for in, particularly, I want to focus on nonverbal
Yeah.
behaviors when we're talking to someone?
Well, you have to understand that people have estimated that 95% of communication between humans occurs nonverbally. And that means that you are registering other people's information that they give off nonverbally. It's registering to you unconsciously and sometimes consciously. They have a look on their face, they have a posture that seems a little bit negative towards you, etc. You're noticing it. Sometimes you're not noticing it, but you're not paying deep attention. You're not registering it. You're not trusting that information. You pay too much attention to words. When you meet someone for the first time, you're mesmerized by their talk, by what they're saying, and you're not really paying focused attention on that nonverbal aspect, which is where most of humans communicate. You see, when we talk with words, we're able to say anything. Oh, Sean, I love your podcast. Oh, yes, you look wonderful today. Oh, yes, I love your book. But we don't necessarily mean it. I'm not being personal, and I'm just using it as an example.
Of course.
We don't necessarily mean it, right? We can lie, we can deceive, we can mislead with our words. But body language can't lie. So when you say something, you say, I love what you wrote, and the smile is kind of fake and forced, and the eyes don't light up, and the cheekbones don't separate like that, and the whole face doesn't light up, that's an indication that's a false emotion. They're trying to pretend to make you like them, that they really are impressed with what you did. So you can determine the real intention of people, whether they really like what you're saying or really like you or really like what you're doing or not. And the smile is the one that people use the most to disguise what they're feeling. And that smile tends to be kind of tight, like this, got a lot of tension in it. Whereas if you're really excited by someone, the whole cheekbones rise up, the eyes widen and move to the side, etc. And so, I wrote a book called The Art of Seduction. And knowing that kind of information makes you realize the other person actually likes me. They're following under my spell. They're interested in what I'm saying. Another indication of that same thing is if people mirror you. If you move your arm like this, and then they do that same gesture unconsciously, that means that they're letting their defenses down and they're interested in you. Another thing is, it's like a language. I compare it to a language like French or Spanish or any language. You need to learn the vocabulary. So if you walk up to someone at a party or a social gathering or even at work, and their feet are facing away from you to the side when you walk up, that means that they're actually not that interested in talking to you. That they're actually their body is directed in another direction. But that's really where they want to go. They're not excited to see you. So pay attention to people's posture, whether they're facing you, whether they're looking you in the eye. Another thing is these are tests that you can do. You can go up to someone and surprise them from an angle and see their reaction to you. And in that first second, they can't disguise the fact that they're happy to see you or that they're not happy to see you. They may suddenly post a fake smile. Oh, it's great to see you, Sean. Oh, wonderful. But before they put that little mask on, there was a funny look on their face. You don't register it, but if you pay attention, it shows that they're really not excited to see you, right?
Oh.
So there's all this incredible language that reveals how people really, truly feel because you can't fake these things, And then I talk about signs that reveal confidence in people, which is hard to fake, and which shows a leader who is basically insecure and the kind of behavior that they go in that reveals that they're not secure, that their ego is rather fragile, on and on. The language is incredible, and mastering this language will give you incredible social power.
Yeah, that's fascinating. To go back on the point where you're approaching someone from a different angle, are you saying that this is something where they don't see you coming, so you can see their actual reaction when they first see you?
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Because if they see, oh, Sean's coming, they've got like now 5 seconds to put that fake smile on their face and to pretend to be excited. But if you suddenly come like that, and so like if with your friend, like take your best friend, for instance, if they suddenly, someone you really like, they came and they did that to you, you would have a very happy reaction. You're so happy to see them. It just lights up your face, right? You can't disguise that. But the opposite is true. If somebody does that you don't really want to see, it'll show up on your face before you have a chance to control it, This is just on and on and on. There are other things like that, but
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder though if that will still apply. How would that work if, let's say, I mean, this is a common issue, right? With let's say you're approaching a girl and you come at her surprised, there might be the survival instinct in her that, okay, she was kind of instantly surprised because, her instinct is survival. So I guess you have to filter some of those, right? Or are you still saying that says a lot about the way she thinks about you?
yes, it's true that maybe she'll register a little bit of fear. That's true. But if she is excited to see you, I still believe no matter the conditioning that a woman or anybody has about a stranger approaching them, it'll still show up on her face. Imagine that a woman that you're interested in does that to you. It's going to register on your face, right? You might be surprised for a second. You don't want to like frighten people.
Yeah.
No, it's gotta be a little bit. Right. So, but I think that the emotion will be there. And it's not just the face. I've been talking about the face, but pay attention to the tone of voice because the voice is something that's also very difficult to fake. Actors are the only ones that can do that. And it takes a lot of training because our voice betrays our excitement. The pitch tends to go up We tend to talk faster when we're excited, when we're happy. Other things happen when we're nervous, our kind of stutter and etc. So pay attention very quickly to the tone and voice that they have, and also to their posture. You know, what another thing I talk about in nonverbal communication are kind of mixed signals. So this isn't the surprise one, this is just in general. So the person that you go up to, their they have a smile on their face, but their tone of voice is kind of tense, right? And so it's the negative quality that they're trying to disguise, but they can't disguise. It's easy to post a fake smile. It's not easy to really show excitement in the voice. So they're saying, "Oh, Sean, it's great to see you." But the voice reveals that they're really not that excited to see you. And the same thing goes for body posture. There's an open posture, there's an excited posture. The body is open. And there's a kind of a cramped negative posture, like, "Oh, get away from me. Oh, I don't want to see you."
Right.
You know, you can make mistakes in deciphering people's behavior, and you have to be careful. And I talk about that. They call that Othello's error. So Othello in the play thought that his wife, he accuses her of being unfaithful, and she reacts all fearful, and he assumes that means she is unfaithful. But in fact, she was just being intimidated, and so he misread it. So you can make mistakes. You have to be careful, and you have to think and analyze it and make sure that you're not sort of interpreting it in the wrong way. But there's a whole incredible language that you're not paying attention to, and that is extremely eloquent, whether it's in the realm of seduction, whether it's in the office and dealing with your boss or your colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that used to the thing that used to be a little bit hard for me as I was doing it when I was a little bit younger is that you have a lot of thoughts in your head, as you mentioned. So you tend to think about what other people are thinking about you in the conversation instead of thinking about what their reaction is or how their tone of voice is. And as soon as I started to get out of myself, and it certainly helps with interviews, it's all about over preparation and really knowing what you're talking about and not really BSing. But in conversations, a lot of that confidence and getting out of yourself, which is self-awareness, really helps you train and not make those mistakes. As you mentioned, you can certainly misread people, especially those that are really good at acting. So you talk about acting and how we're all actually actors in our lives, and the fact that we should train ourselves to become better actors in some ways. Talk to us a little bit about the logic behind that.
Well, we're very natural actors as a social animal. We're continually performing. And you notice it behavior in children. Children are very good at putting on a particular mask to please their parents and to get what they want. If a child wants a toy or wants candy, they certainly know how to put that angelic face on and to charm their parents. So if children at the age of 4 or 5 are becoming great actors, you better believe that it's something extremely embedded in our nature. And so as a social animal whose survival depends on getting along with people, we learn to wear a mask. We learn to play a certain part. And so, you'll notice that somebody who is a lawyer will tend to have a certain kind of demeanor and body language, etc., whereas someone who's a rock musician will have a much different demeanor. And you don't want to see that demeanor of the rock musician on your lawyer who's now defending you. You don't want to see a rock musician who kind of behaves like a lawyer, because that's kind of off-putting. So we're used to people playing roles. This is what a president should look like. This is what an airplane pilot, this is the aura and the mask they should be wearing. So we're continually performing. And when people aren't performing, when they do their role badly, if we go into a shop and the salesperson there is like not pretending to be interested in us and is acting kind of like a rebellious teenager, it doesn't fit the role and we're kind of put off by it. So understand that in your life you are a performer. And the other indication of this is, so in the course of a day, you deal with 5 different types of people. You deal with colleagues, deal with people who are below you on the hierarchy, you deal with bosses, you deal with your spouse, your family, etc. And for each person, you wear a different mask. You don't talk to your boss in the same manner that you talk to a colleague or your children or your wife. You suddenly put on a different face. You talk in a different manner. So you're constantly altering how you behave, your voice, your manner, your words. You tailor it to who you're dealing with. And most of us do this unconsciously. And the problem is that some of us are bad actors. We're so self absorbed, we're so involved in our own thoughts that we don't realize that people are continually judging us. When you're out in the social world, people are judging you. They're trying to see if you fit the role, if you are who you say you are, etc. And they're looking at you, they're scrutinizing you. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to say things, you're going to do things that are inappropriate, and they're going to be offended. They're going to wonder about you. And these little kind of sins that you do on a day-to-day basis, eventually they'll add up in the work world. People will go, maybe Sean isn't what he says he is. Maybe he's not quite up to this job, etc. Maybe he doesn't have the confidence to pull it off. So be aware that people are observing you and that you need to perform. You need to play the role that's appropriate. And don't be ashamed about this. And don't be embarrassed about it and think it's negative or guilty or something's wrong. This is who we are. We're social animals. We're performers. And why do we venerate actors so much? We admire them because they are the best actors of all. They know how to play 40 different roles, and we think that that's fantastic. If you're able to do that in real life, if you can move from one social setting to another, and play different parts and fit into the group that you're talking to, that's a consummate social skill, and there's no need to feel guilty about it. So I'm trying to tell you, become a better actor, and I have sort of ideas about how to do that that I talk about in the book.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of people listening or watching this right now, their immediate thought might be, by playing an actor in our lives, it may seem like we're encouraging people to be fake. Is that a different realm you're saying?
Well, you're not doing that when you go home and you're with your spouse and when you're with your children. Although even with your children, you play the role of the father, right? You have to be the father figure. And they have to see that you're the father figure, and they have to see that there's some authority there. And same with the mother, etc. So even there, you're playing a role, okay? But you can let down your mask. You can be yourself. But when you're in the work world, you have to realize that you can't just be whoever you are. And the proof of it is, and I'm telling you, people who say what you say, and I'm not faulting you, you're being hypocritical because in point of fact, in truth, you act differently to your boss anyway. You're not all chummy with him or her. You're not, having the same kind of carefree, easy manner that you have with a colleague. Nobody violates that. You're all aware that with the boss, you have to be different. So get away from that hypocrisy and act like you're being authentic. Do you ever really tell your boss exactly what you think about his or her idea? Do you ever really tell them what you really think about the job that they're doing? Rarely, because you know you'll pay a price. And yet you don't think of that. You think that you're lying? No, you're just playing the role that you need to do. You're just surviving. You're trying to protect yourself. So in certain moments, it's good to be authentic. At certain moments with your friends after you leave work, or if you're a performer in the public realm, if you're a rock musician or an artist, letting some of your natural energy and being authentic will actually play very well. But if you're in a social environment where people are judging you and looking at you and seeing what kind of role you're playing and how well you're doing, and they're looking at you and seeing if you fit in, you better be careful, because not fitting in and being judged negatively is going to cost you in the long run. So I want to get rid of the guilt that people feel about that.
Yeah. It's and I'm thinking about this not as a parent, but as just in my own life, where it comes to talking with my mom is completely different than I would talk to my brother or my friends, all of whom I'm completely comfortable with, all of them who I know there's a mutual love there. And even as a parent is probably more than ever, because as having a kid, you have to censor yourself. You're not going to swear around them. You're not going to see the content that you're going to watch. It's actually such a core thing, and your kid is really the thing that you love the most in this world. It
Yeah.
really makes me rethink this idea of what authenticity mean and what this common quote that everyone lives by, which is be yourself and love yourself and be like what. It kind of makes me rethink this whole idea of what that means. It seems like we have multiple identities actually that we have to use as a tool based on what situations we're on.
Yeah, and I don't want to downplay the importance of being authentic. So even as a parent, your children have to feel like that you're not always fake, that it's not just a put on, that you genuinely love them. So it's like the problem human beings have is they can only think in either or situations. They can only think it's black or white. I'm either being inauthentic or I'm being authentic. Well, it isn't like that. Life is more nuanced. So with your children, you're playing a role where sometimes you play the father figure, the authority figure. You change your behavior. You don't smoke marijuana in front of them. I'm just kidding, whatever it is, etc. You tailor what you say, but then you're also being natural with them when you're playing with them. You're also at the same time able to show who you are and be yourself and be your natural energy. You can do both things at the same time. It's not impossible. And we do it all of the time, right? We're constantly doing that. It's just that you're not aware of that fact. So even at work, people can see who you are in your natural energy and see some of that authentic self that you are. They can't see completely because you might offend people if you're completely yourself. So you're able to let out some of it depending on where you work. Some offices are different. So in my consulting work, I once went to Microsoft. I did a talk at Microsoft, and everyone there was really buttoned down and nervous and repressed.
Mm.
And in that work environment, you can't really be yourself. And then I gave a talk at Google up in Mountain View. That's the all totally opposite. They're all like children. They're all like playing. They're all like loose, etc. There you have more room to kind of
Mm.
let it out and be yourself. Not completely, but more room. So don't think in terms of black or white, authentic or inauthentic. You can combine both at the same time. If you're completely fake, if you're always, wearing a mask, that doesn't play well either. People will think that you are a phony. So you have to be a good actor. I did some acting before I wrote books. A
Mm.
good actor is able to actually play a role and be authentic in it. They learn to generate the emotion that they're trying to feel. So if they're playing a role that's where they're crying and sad, they first generate that. They think about experiences in their life where they had something sad happen, and then they feel the emotion. So they know the importance of actually bringing some authenticity to the role that they're playing.
Mm.
So it's a mix. It's a kind of a dance that you're doing between the two.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah. As a last topic that, as we close this off, Robert, I want to talk about, I think in between our last conversation and today, I know you suffered something that was pretty tragic, which was a near-death experience of having a stroke. And I know you talk about this publicly as well and how this relates to your new book. So you've got 18 laws in the laws of human nature, and the last law is about death and the denial of death. Talk to us a little bit about how this real life event that's happened to you relates to this closing of the book.
Yeah, it was very weird. It was almost like the gods were looking down, or God was trying to play a game with me, because the last chapter of the book, as you mentioned, is about death and confronting your mortality, which I wrote I think I finished it in about May of 2018. The book came out in October of that year. And so I wrote all my sort of thoughts about confronting your mortality and how being in denial of it is actually holding you back. It's actually riddling you with fears. And then 3 months later, a little less than 3 months later, I had a stroke and I came this close to dying. I was driving a car. My wife, my girlfriend then, was next to me. And she said, pull over, something's wrong. No, everything's fine. She noticed that my whole face was funny and everything was wrong. She was very worried. She had me pull over, and I'm unconscious and I'm in a coma for several hours, and I had a stroke. And so if she hadn't noticed that right away And if the ambulance hadn't come quickly and took me to the hospital that was close, I wouldn't be talking to you here right now, Sean.
Wow.
I would have either suffered permanent brain damage, which I came very close to having, which would have meant I couldn't even talk, or I would be dead. And or if I'd been alone and driving, I would be dead for sure. So I came very close to dying, and it was a very vivid experience. I'm unconscious for a while. Strange things are kind of going on, although you are unconscious, and then you awaken, and you don't know what happened, and then it suddenly sort of pieced together, and I sort of felt in those few moments, I felt death kind of invading my body before I passed out. And I can remember it after I woke up, a feeling that I still sometimes have. It's physical, like it's hard to explain, but it was something that feel in my bones, kind of a strange softness, as if things from the inside were melting. And so the irony is, 3 months before that, I was writing an intellectual abstract thing about confronting your mortality. And then suddenly it became something very, very real. And it was there. And so it's one thing to talk about it and analyze it. It's another thing to experience it. You know, it's very visceral, it's very real. And it's been a very powerful experience. Not all very positive, because the stroke, I'm someone who's very physically active. I like to swim and hike. And that was just ripped away from me. Suddenly overnight, I can't do any of that. I'm getting better very slowly, but the frustration and the actual envy that I have. So I'm sitting here in my office in Los Angeles. It's spring, and I'm seeing people bicycling up the hill and running and hiking. God damn it! I wish 2 years ago I could do all of that. Why? Why did that have to happen to me? I'm so envious. I had to deal with that. I had to deal with those emotions, and I'm learning and I'm getting better at it. I'm developing patience. I'm kind of meditating more, and I'm trying to work on myself. But the other thing is, I I'm not afraid of dying anymore. I already experienced it. The fear is gone, and it's sort of like a nice feeling to know that you don't have this incredible fear that you carry around with you. It's not that I want to die. I'm very much happy that I'm alive, and I'm also very grateful. So sometimes, like yesterday, I was thinking, what if I had been swimming when this happened, which I'm often doing? I wouldn't be here, I would have drowned. And now I wouldn't be having this conversation. I would be dead. People would be talking about me. My book would be out there, but I would be gone. And so when you think like that, it kind of makes you appreciate that you are alive, that I am here talking to Sean Kim, that I still have my brain here. I'm going to be able to write another book. So confronting death, as I wrote in that chapter, is a good thing. It makes you not so afraid of anything in life. And it also makes you appreciate the things that you constantly took for granted. The view out of my window, the sound of birds in the air, everything, and things that sound a little bit cliched and Pollyannish, but they're true. Yeah, I'm alive. I can appreciate them. So, what I wrote about in that chapter is very real. I'm not saying that it's not relevant. It's 1,000 times more real when you go through it.
Yeah, it's an ironic process. It's an ironic process that we have, especially since it's one of those things that most of us, probably everyone, fear the most, especially when we're nearing death. And it's insane how little prepared we are for facing it, whether it's for ourselves or for others. It's just not something that anyone's going to teach you necessarily, unless it's something that you train yourself to think about, which is something that you're encouraging other people to do. How has it affected the way you see yourself in career-wise? Do you feel like you're more ambitious and you're willing to take more risks because you've seen what's on the other side?
Well, I'm not so young anymore. I just turned 61 a couple of weeks ago.
Happy belated birthday.
Huh?
Happy belated birthday.
Thank you very much. So, I can't be I know one thing is my next book is dealing a little bit with this experience
Mm.
of facing death. I have a whole philosophy around it that I'm building up in my next book. And I'm very motivated to get this book out and to write it because I know that any day now I could die. I could get the coronavirus tomorrow. I'm a high risk for that because I had the stroke. I could, be hit in my car tomorrow. I could have another stroke. I better get that book out before I die. So it's gotten me more focused on that. And I am working very hard, but I have to be careful because if I work too hard, part of the reason I had the stroke was I worked too hard. I took too much stress on. So I have to be a little bit careful.
Yeah.
So it's kind of made me much more focused to get this next book out before I'm dead because I want it to be out there. It's a very important book to me. But some people, it tends to think, well, now that I face this, it doesn't matter anymore. I don't even need to get anything more done. It doesn't have that effect on me because I love my work and I love getting a book out there. But I know that I'm not getting younger and I just have to be more careful with my energy and not let this happen again. So it hasn't curtailed my desire or my ambition. It's just made me a little more careful and not pushing myself too hard.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think just given everything with Corona and all the news that we're hearing, I think people around the world are thinking more about death. And I think, hopefully, the lesson here is that you can you can die doing what you love, but it would be worse if you died without doing what you
Yeah,
didn't love.
very much so, very much so. Yeah, I mean, I make that point in my prior book, Mastery. I talk about Leonardo da Vinci, sort of the icon of that book. And he had a quote, he was on his deathbed, basically saying, just like at the end of a day when you worked really hard, you have kind of a blessed sleep. If you've worked hard your whole life and got things done that you wanted to do, you have a blessed death. It's like going to sleep after a hard day's work. I'm ready to give up my life because I've accomplished things. I've done what I wanted to do. So that's so for if you're younger, it's a wake up call. And I make that point in that chapter. You tend to think, I've got this incredible vista of time ahead of me. I've got 40, 50, 60, 70 years. I can waste some time here and there. Yeah, it's okay to waste some time, but you probably don't have as much time as you think, and you could die tomorrow very easily. So knowing that, knowing that you could be taken away from you in 5 or 10 or 20 years, do you want to die not having done any of those things that you dreamed of doing, not experiencing those things that you wanted to experience, not accomplishing those things that you set out that you dreamed of when you were younger? You didn't write that book, you didn't start that business, you didn't make that film, you didn't start that podcast, etc. That's the worst feeling in the world, to be facing death in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and to realize I didn't do anything that I wanted to do, and now it's too late. I don't want you to have that feeling. So, you know, confronting your mortality is not a morbid thing. It doesn't mean thinking only about death. It's not like a goth kind of thing. It's more about developing a sense of urgency that each day could be your last day and you better appreciate it. You better work as hard as you can and get things done and appreciate the time that you do have and appreciate the people that you're around. So some of the people that I'm around, like my wife now or other people, you know, I might not have been here for them. So I appreciate them 100 times more. And the same thing in reverse. Think of the people in your life and imagine that tomorrow they could be taken from you. Wouldn't that alter how you view them right now? Wouldn't you be a little more interested in them and appreciate them on a higher level instead of taking them for granted? So the awareness of death, which is so much repressed in our modern culture because we don't see anybody dying around us. It all occurs in hospitals where we're hidden from our view, as opposed to 100, 200 years ago where people were dying all around us in the house, etc. It's very important because we can go through life without ever thinking about it, without ever confronting it. But in fact, it is a terribly negative thing to repress that confrontation because it's the most real thing that we have to face. And facing it has all of these incredible benefits for your own personal well-being and for your relationships with other people and for your work as well.
Vanessa,
Yes.
this is actually the third time you've been on the show.
Can you believe it?
And I mean,
I love our interviews so much. When you reached out, I was like, yes, let's do it again.
Yes. And one of the things we wanted to talk about was something that was different.
Yes.
And one thing that has changed is that you've had a second child now.
I have, yes. Claire. Yes.
And I'm sure Sienna is a very
vivacious 5-year-old.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things I want to talk about, because I actually just visited back home to see my brother, and the way he's communicating now has definitely changed. He's more patient. He's a better listener. What are the things that you've learned? I know this is your second child, but I'm sure you get reminded about these experiences.
Oh, yeah. Second kid is more, because everything that you thought was a fluke the first time is real.
Really?
Yeah, because it confirms it. So one thing that I think about a lot, and this is, I think, helpful for everyone, whether you're a parent or not, is how we form our communication styles. Right. So as adults, we have communication styles, ways that we communicate on text or email, like even down to how we use exclamation points. So Sean, are you an exclamation point user or no?
Depends on the person. I know one of the conversations you said we have to adjust based on who we're talking to.
Yes.
So I do adjust sometimes, but I would say mostly not.
Okay.
Mostly not.
I think, and anyone who's watching this, for highly competent folks who lean higher on the competence scale, which they're competent communicators, it is physically painful for them to add exclamation points. Like they are like, ooh, it sounds like I'm yelling. It's too enthusiastic.
Right.
Whereas highly warm communicators, they love an exclamation point. They have an exclamation point after every sentence, right? They love emojis. They love words like wow, yay, whoop, fab. Okay.
Right.
So that even just down to our way we communicate, there's different styles. So we actually form our communication styles starting around age 3.
Oh,
this is amazing to think about. So there was research that was done, incredible amount of data, where they had 3-year-olds come into their lab, not really their caregivers.
Yeah.
And they asked caregivers to rate their child's personality on a number of different traits. And so the caregivers filled out this huge survey of their children, everything from agreeableness to extroversion to organization to conscientiousness, all the personality traits. Then they followed these children for 25 years.
Wow, it's a long study.
It's a really long study. And when they went back to these kids, now adults at 27, 28, they had them do the same test for themselves. And what they found, the results were shockingly similar. The way that caregivers described them at age 3 was shockingly similar to the way that they described themselves at age 28.
Interesting.
So what I think about is, okay, if our personality, our communication style is nature or nurture, right? 3 is not birth, right? Can we change it, right? If we have a communication style that isn't working for us, can we change it if it's been ingrained in us from 3? And then second, what can we learn about ourselves? And also, how can we help our children develop communication styles that really work for them? So as I have a second, I'm seeing how different they are. Same parents, same home, same city, and they are radically different. And so I've been thinking a lot about how our communication styles grow.
And it's not about the lifestyle, right? Because you guys are the same parents, you're treating them the same values.
Yes.
It's really just the fact that they're different.
Same bedroom. Like we moved my daughter out of her bedroom so that we could have the baby. So same crib, same chair, same, and still radically different. Now she's only 8 months old, but I'm already seeing the differences. And so I think, one thing that people could think about is what forces shaped your personality. So was that genetics? Could be. Is it the way your parents parented you? Is there things along the way that shape the way that you communicate? I think that those are interesting things to think about when we're talking about, how we relate to others. Right.
So are you adjusting based on that now that you have observed it to treat them differently? Or should you? Like, is that the way it should be done for parents that are seeing such vast different personalities amongst babies?
Yes, with an exclamation point. I like exclamation points.
Yes.
I even verbally add exclamation points. That's how much I like them. Okay, so here's my approach, especially now that I'm a parent. I really think this. So I was grown up I was growing up. I was taught the golden rule growing up. You know, the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, right? That was what I was taught. And I think that that is a fundamentally flawed way of looking at life. And so I am not parenting with the golden rule. And I actually don't teach the golden rule. Every one of my students knows I'm much more for the platinum rule. The platinum rule, you know, by the way, the play here is that platinum is more precious than gold. Yes. Okay. And the platinum rule is that you should treat others as they would want to be treated. And I think this is a really important thing to think about is if we are, let's just take conscientiousness, right? Conscientiousness is an aspect of our personality. There's 5 aspects of our personality. You know them as ocean, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. Okay. And I love talking about neuroticism. If you want to
and
talk
it was
about
always the one that I don't know about. But
let's talk about that one because that's the biggest difference between my kids. Because I have a high neurotic and a low neurotic.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, let's do neuroticism. So neuroticism is our emotional stability. High neurotics are reactive to their environment. They have a lot less internal emotional stability. They are worriers typically. They actually feel negative experiences more strongly. Most people think neuroticism is a choice, but actually it is a chemical difference in how we process. People who are high neuroticism, this is me. Yeah. We carry long forms of a certain gene called the serotonin transporter gene. This gene means that high neurotics produce less serotonin more slowly. So what happens to a high neurotic is I'm in the car. My husband's a low neurotic. I'm a high neurotic. That pairing goes really well, by the way.
Is that a formula?
It can be really helpful to have like opposites help each other in a lot of ways because there's strengths and weaknesses to both, which we'll talk about both.
Please, yeah.
We're in the car. Someone almost hits us. Okay. We go, at the same time. Both my husband and I, our cortisol begins to flow and we're like, whew, that was close. But as a high neurotic, the serotonin, which helps calm you down or it helps you feel okay, it's kind of a sense of belonging, is slower. So my husband, immediately everything's okay. His body produces serotonin and he's forgot about that little accident within a couple of minutes. Me, I'm still in cortisol. Even 20 minutes later, I'm a little bit jumpy. And that is because my body produces less serotonin more slowly, meaning I feel negative experiences more strongly. That is why worriers worry. They are literally worriers because it hurts them more when something bad happens.
Right.
Whereas a low neurotic is like, it's no big deal. If something goes wrong, we'll deal with it because they can recover so quickly. So there are benefits, pros and cons. Low neurotics are emotionally stable. They are very calm. They can usually control their inner experience. They are great in a crisis. Right? They are the rock who gets you through. They are very level-headed. They can keep you calm. They can stay calm. They're the people you want next to you if something's going wrong.
Sure.
High neurotics prevent crises from happening in the first place.
Right.
High neurotics are like, we don't want a crisis to happen.
Right.
So we're going to get all the emergency gear. We're going to have plans B, C, D, and E. Right? So both are incredibly important.
You
need both.
You need
have
both. Yes.
Right. So knowing that, I have a high neurotic daughter and I believe my little is a low neurotic. Already I can see this. And so for my high neurotic, I know that she experiences negative experiences more strongly. So if I'm a high neurotic, I'm going to treat her with more care in that way. I'm going to tell her the plan ahead of time. I'm going to tell her the backup plan. Whereas my little one, I let her do things that I never let my first child do because I'm like, she'll be all right.
Sure.
So I'm trying to treat them as they should be treated as opposed to how I would treat them.
Right.
And that's how I approach all relationships.
Right. And it's something that people don't really think about, right? I would imagine if you're not aware of that, the person that has low neuroticism would be like, oh, this person is way too reactive. Calm down.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
And vice versa. I'm sure the other person is like, why are you so calm all the time? Like,
you're not being proactive.
Are you a robot? Like, you know, do you have any emotions? It's certainly a barrier.
Yes. And so this is, I think, something that is, when we know it, it frees us, right? So one is think about the 3 to 5 most important people in your life. Are they high, medium, or low? It can be high. It's a scale. Right? So high, medium, or low. For your high neurotics in your life, a gift you can give them is knowing their worry triggers. Right? What triggers their worry? Like for me, my husband knows that not having a plan kind of triggers my worry. So he's really good at trying to get a plan for me.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
He would never do a surprise party for me. Right? He would know that would not make me happy. Yeah. So what are their worry triggers? And second, how do they worry? Are they verbalizers? or are they closed downers, shutter inners, right? So there are two different kinds of worry. So extroverts typically verbalize their worry. They want to talk it out. And they don't want you to solve it, right? They verbalize it until they're like, done, empty. Then you have high neurotics who usually introverts they shut down. They want to retreat. They want to be alone. They want to process. They want to think. They do not want to be talked to, bothered, touched, anything. They need to process before they can even begin to talk about it. It is a gift to allow your worrier to worry as they naturally worry. If you try to pry out an introvert, they feel very violated and unsupported when all you're doing is trying to understand, but they're not ready yet.
They might even go further down the rabbit hole of
and push you away.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas a high neurotic, if you try to shut down their verbalizing, they will not stop worrying. Right? They feel super unheard. And so it's a gift to give them that. Treat them as they want to be treated. If you are a high neurotic and you have a low neurotic in your life, it's very important to understand that they do not understand how you experience bad things. So when they say don't worry, they don't mean it in a mean way.
Right.
They really don't. They really think they're trying to be helpful.
Right.
They also are going to say things like calm down.
I was just going to say that. I was like, do not use that word.
Do not
use those two words.
The word, right? What is the famous phrase? Never in the history of calm down has calm down ever calmed anyone down. That is the way it works.
So true.
So we should try to avoid that. But when they do say something like calm down or no worries, they really are coming from a good place. The last thing you want to do is react at them.
What is it that is the essence of the way humans communicate that even AI today won't really be able to replicate? Like, what is the thing where if you heard an AI speak versus a human speak, what is the difference that like, no, because of this, this is the real Vanessa Van Edwards or the real Joe Rogan? How do we tell those apart?
I think the only way right now, and this could change in a couple of years, but right now, and I created deep fakes of myself to see how it would go.
Oh, so interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
It did not get right, not even close. Intonation and emphasis. Vocal power. It was really interesting because we uploaded my audiobooks. So that's, 12 hours of me speaking. We uploaded podcasts where I was speaking conversationally. So it had dozens of hours of me speaking and it did not get the intonation right. It was my voice.
Yeah.
But I'll give you an example. So I have a certain kind of cadence that I speak with. I'll emphasize different parts of a sentence. My deep fake would emphasize the wrong things.
Oh, interesting.
And so at the end of a sentence, it would do differently. It would sound different than how I actually sound. I would never talk like that, but it would make it. So the emphasis was so wrong that you knew it wasn't correct and it wasn't helpful. Like I emphasize words based on what I think is helpful to the listener, right? So like when we talk about neuroticism, I emphasize neuroticism because it's a hard word. I slow it down and I want you to hear it. The AI doesn't know that's a hard word.
Yeah.
So it's not going to add emphasis or more eloquence to that word to help the listener understand. Whereas I am thinking very quickly, what's the most important word in this sentence?
Right.
What's a word that someone's going to be hard to understand? So they didn't get that right. However, I think there's a lot of opportunity and I am not that scared. Mostly because I don't think it's helpful to me, but also because I think there's some things that I literally don't have time to do that AI can do for me.
Sure.
For example, people have asked us, hey, I would love to have an option on your website where I could listen to your articles. Well, the only way to do that before was having like a really awful AI voice be like, confidence strategies.
Right.
So now
Serious
we can
stuff.
turn on my voice so people can listen to something kind of like me for the articles. I could never have time to read all 700 articles on my website, but at least my voice can kind of do it.
Assuming most people are having in-person conversations and they can't use AI to have these conversations just yet.
Yes.
You never know what's going to happen.
Yes.
What is actually happening that allows you to have that warmth of communication, but also show competence in an in-person conversation?
Yes. Well, first of all, a lot of my students, I ask them to write first because it trains you. So whether you do that with AI or not, it's helpful to actually practice with writing first because it's very hard to do it in person. So like I think of it as like a practice stepladder. The hardest is in person. That's the last way I want you to practice because when you're there's so many inputs happening right now that we're in person. We're making eye contact. I'm looking at your nodding, your posture, your hand gestures. I'm thinking about my posture, my hand gestures. I'm also very aware that there's cameras around. It's a lot. So to add warmth and confidence on top is too hard. So, okay, don't practice in person. Then it's the phone. No, actually, then it's video. Yeah. Video like is a little bit smaller than phone, then chat, then text, then emails. So I actually would like people to start actually on those steps.
Progressive.
Because it does train you to use those words. So in person, if we were to skip all the way to the top, there are 4 ways that we send warmth and competence. Our words, that's one way. Our body language, gestures, posture, facial expressions. Our voice, our vocal power, our cadence, our volume, our tone, and our ornaments. The clothes we wear, what's in our background, our earrings, your glasses, your watch, what you're drinking, what you're holding in a profile picture, what's behind you in a profile picture, ornaments.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of options, 4 channels that you can choose to play with because you can add warmth and competence to any of them.
Right.
So my goal is like, okay, I want you to be authentically warm and competent. I don't want you to do something that doesn't feel natural to you. Which channel do you like the best? Which one feels the most comfortable to you? And then I'm going to give you, there are 96 cues that you can play with, like a recipe.
96.
96
Crazy,
cues. Yes,
right?
there are 96. Now, I tried to create an encyclopedia of all the cues. And there are probably more than 96, but I was able to kind of group them. Like, for example, head behavior, just head behavior alone, there's probably 10 to 12. So there's up and down nodding. There's horizontal nodding. There's the side nodding, right? There's a head tilt. There's like fast nodding, like impatient. So but even just in that, so I try to bucket them, but you have 96 cues at your disposal to play with. And so you can choose which of those channels you want to optimize first.
So one of the difficult things that at least I have when I enter like an in-person conversation, particularly in group settings, right? I would say, I think you're an ambivert, right?
Yeah, I'm an ambivert, yeah.
I'm similar as well. And I do need to recharge when I'm in these in-person conversations. And when I'm out of practice, right? Maybe I've been focused heads down, you know, maybe some of us have had a baby and they haven't had that experience of like getting at the rust of speaking. And I review the 96 cues. But for me, I always seem to be in my head during the conversations to know where my hands should be, to know what my tone of voice should be, to know what questions I should ask. And I often find myself not being present sometimes because of these things that I have to think about.
Yes.
Is there any things that you can do before maybe you go into a group setting that can help you get maybe a little bit less social anxiety, or just help you kind of maybe even during the moment to help you actually have these conversations in a more natural way and be more present?
Yes. So there's a couple answers to this. I'll give all of them. So the first one is your chemistry. So there is a lot of research to show that if we are in a fear mode, that is very contagious. It's almost impossible to be charismatic when you're feeling afraid or anxious. And that's a big statement, I know, but it comes from a study. So they wanted to study how fear works socially.
Right.
So they brought people into their lab. They split them up into 2 different groups. The first group, they wore sweat pads. They're horrible sweatsuits that catch your sweat under your armpits. And they had them run on the treadmill. Sweaty, exercise, sweat.
Right.
The second group, they had them wear sweat pads and skydive for the first time. So fear-induced sweat. They took these sweat pads and they had unsuspecting participants, but the participants had no idea what they were smelling, smell these sweat pads. Now they had no idea what, they didn't even know there was sweat.
Yeah.
But they put them in an fMRI machine and they gave them to smell these sweat pads. Gross, right? People who smelled the fear sweat pads, their own fear part of their amygdala lit up. So somehow their brain could smell that fear sweat and they began to feel afraid.
Interesting.
And so this is the first of many studies that is beginning to look at the cues that we don't even know we're sending through our pheromones, maybe through our sweat. I mean, right? Or even like down to cues we can't control, our blink rate. Blink rate is a cue. I didn't talk about it in my book because you can't control it.
Right.
But higher blink rate is associated with more nervousness.
And now I'm blinking right now.
Right, you're blinking more. I know. The moment, so it was in my book and my editor and I were talking about it and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna take it out because the moment someone thinks about their blink rate, they start blinking more.
I know.
It's a horrible affliction.
It's like once you see someone yawn, right? Like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a really weird thing. So there's all these cues that we can't even control. Okay. So one is before you even show up, I think it's really important to work on your chemistry. That's twofold. Do not go to events that make you really anxious or nervous. I am a big believer in that. If there's someone that you're dreading seeing, don't see them. Cut them out of your life.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Like I don't go. So for example, I was just at a big conference. We were talking about it. I did not go to the welcome party. The welcome party is not for me.
Yeah, me neither.
The ambiverts, I cannot do it. Loud, really big spaces, with like lots of wandering around, not for me. I did not go to the closing party. I love the workshops. I love the books talks. I love sitting in the audience and listening. I love like the sidebar conversations. So I say know that about yourself. Like don't put yourself in those situations because it's really hard to be charismatic. Second, if you have to go into one of those conversations or you're a little bit nervous, I do think that laughter is sort of like the secret key to unlocking and changing your chemistry. It releases all kinds of endorphins. It makes you feel happier. And so I have a laughter playlist that I watch on YouTube, which is a ton of funny videos.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing when I'm putting on makeup. That's what I'm doing like before I walk into a room. I'll call a funny friend. I listen to funny podcasts. Like I think laughter, like it immediately snaps you out of it.
Right.
That's that. The second thing, so we talked about, the question was about going into an event that makes you a little bit nervous. Yeah. And if you can, try to have a wingman. Wingman or wingwoman.
Wingman always helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. One of the cues that we didn't talk about, we talked a lot about like the different ornaments and the physical natures. But one thing that I was curious about is smell. And smell, as we just brought up, is the only thing that you can actually go through when you're in an in-person experience, where you're a job interview or a date or an interview like this. So talk to me a bit about smell between different genders as well. And what's like a safe smell that you can use for any different scenarios that just allows you to be. There's
so much research being done on this, which is really exciting. So there's like the pheromone side of things and the synthetic side of things. So your natural scent versus scents you can add. So one is there is somehow a scent to fear, right? Like that's why getting your chemistry right is the most sexy thing you can do. Like confidence, I think, has a smell in its own way. That's why I said like laughter, I think, is the fastest way. So that's one thing. The second thing is in terms of attraction, they've done a lot of research in this where they take like people's worn shirts and they have couples smell shirts.
I've heard about this.
And you actually go to speed dating events that are based on smell. I think it's called smell dating actually. And they are very effective. We can tell a lot about someone by if our smells match up. And
You're talking about the natural pheromones, not the perfume.
Smell. Nope. Okay. They literally, people had to wear, I think, these shirts for 2 days, no deodorant, no soap, no lotions. And they put them in Ziploc bags, and then you smell and you pick your partner that you want to go on another little speed date with. Yes. And by the way, this is like so weird. One of the studies I read, I forget which one it was, they added in siblings shirts, and people thought their siblings were disgusting.
No way.
Yeah, like they rated people, and like across the board, anyone, they didn't know it was their sibling scent. They rated that one as like the lowest, most unattractive scent. So like there's something to it. Yeah. Oh yeah. Like there's a lot of research in this. It's so interesting. So your natural scent, I actually think is the most important. I think it can attract the right person. Now, do I want you to come in like sweaty from the gym? No, but do I love dating at the gym? Yes. Do I highly recommend trying to date in scenarios where your scent will be more prominent? Yeah, like go on like hike meetups, like go to the beach, meet someone at the pool, like meet someone at the gym, go to dance classes, like like there's something to that. Like if you're looking for your partner.
That's kind of what people talk about, maybe like around vibe, like, I just can't explain it, but I just feel so comfortable around this person physically.
Yes. Okay, the other really weird thing is, this is like the weirdest, you're going to be like, what? Okay, so there was a study. So researchers know that smell is really powerful. So much so that there was a hypothesis which proved to be true that we really like to smell people, but it's socially unacceptable to smell each other, right? Yep. They think it's one of the reasons why we get so close to handshake is because like that we get into smelling distance. It's why a lot of cultures hug or cheek kiss is because even bowing, like we're getting closer to their scent, right? When you bow, you're actually getting closer to where their neck is exposed. Okay. So their hypothesis was that if you handshake with someone, in the next 10 seconds, you will touch your own nose because you're trying to smell their hand.
You mean like...
So like we shake hands.
Shake hands.
Your nose will start to itch in like the next 10 seconds or you'll really want to touch your face. Like I do.
Yeah.
I want to touch my nose very bad.
Right.
Do you?
I mean, I'm like I'm trying not to actively think about it just for the sake of it. But
so like what they studied is that your nose like kind of tingles.
Yeah.
Because it wants you to bring your hand to your nose so you can kind of smell it.
I guess so. I mean, just naturally, you're just bringing it back, right?
But like, watch. So like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever said on YouTube. But like, go to a networking event or a business event and just watch. You will see that people will shake hands and within like 10 to 15 seconds, they inexplicably touch their nose or their face.
Right. Something around it.
Something around it. Because their hypothesis is it's our way of like, very subtly being like, are we good? Like, do we have like chemical match? And now that I'm aware of it, it drives me crazy because I don't want to touch my nose after.
Right. One thing I do is when I'm at a networking event, let's say, like I have an instinct of grabbing my drink because maybe I don't want to just actively touch my nose.
No, but like that's it.
This is pretty much touching my nose, right?
100%.
Yeah, that is a for sure thing.
Or like touch your glasses.
Yes.
Like I really want to itch my nose right now. Like it actively itches.
Interesting.
And I wasn't itching before.
And do you think that's just for even...
Oh, this is not dating. This is like...
This is anyone.
This is any because their hypothesis in the study is that as humans, we're looking for just chemical matchups. And also, we want to see, are you afraid? Right? Like from a caveman perspective, wouldn't you want to know if someone was with you if they were afraid? Right. That would tell you something.
Right.
And so there's a lot more research to be done in this area, but... So natural smell is something. And then the last thing is synthetic smell. So they just studied this. I just put it on my YouTube channel. The most popular scent in the world on humans, so like not just like in a room, is vanilla. Oh. So for women and men, I've never smelled a man who smelled like vanilla, but I wear vanilla perfume because of that study.
Well, you weren't wearing that before?
No, because this is a study I've known about. I've been wearing it forever because of that study.
And that's just a neutral thing that allows you to have like trust, likability, all of these combined, or what's the deal there?
They think that food-related scents make us happy because we like food. We like it makes us feel safe. And vanilla is a food-related scent, right? Like it is. And so maybe there's something to that. I think there is something to that. Like, realtors will often bake cookies in the oven before they show a house because there's something about walking into a house and smelling freshly baked cookies that makes you feel at home.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And so I think it works. Like I've done all kinds of very casual experiments with food-related scents. I did a ridiculous experiment back in my early days where I read a study that people like, men especially, like food-related scents on women. And this is when I was single. I'm married now, but I thought this was like a hilarious study. And so I popped popcorn in the microwave, and then I opened the bags and I rubbed the buttery inside of the bag all over my arms and my neck.
And then you went to the gym?
No, then I went to a frat party. Oh. And I was like dancing with the guy and he was like, dang, you smell good. And I was like, wow, it is flat out butter popcorn that he smells. But he actually commented on it. I didn't do it again because it really is greasy and it makes you break out. But it did work. Like literally the guy was like, dang, you smell good. And I was like, it is literally popcorn butter.
That's so fascinating. And you think it'll work for women as well? Or do you think it's more for men?
I don't think a woman would be like into a guy that smelled like a movie theater.
Right.
I think it only goes the other way.
Yeah. Like, only men would be full of shit.
I think, but like I would be so open to someone running that experiment. Like, go out, smell like some popcorn and just like see what happens.
Wow. What are some things that we can do? Maybe we haven't met this person before, or maybe we are trying to sell something to someone or negotiate, and we just want to build that trust, but there's not a lot of time, right? Because I think people can do that through email.
You don't need time.
Talk to me.
Trust is built almost immediately, like in the first few seconds. Okay. And so actually less time is sometimes easier because our instinct, so The research is very clear on this, that we make our first impression within the first few seconds of seeing someone. It's solidified as we start to talk to them, but it's very, very quickly. That's because our brain wants to take shortcuts. And it's also, in the first few seconds, it's hard to lie to someone. And so we're trying to like look and see, like size someone up very, very quickly. So it's good news, I think. It means you only have to worry about the first few seconds, really. And if you're showing up authentically and you're not going to an event that you don't like, it's easier to show those trust signals. The way that I like to think about it is you want to show that you are on the same page as someone. Physically on the same page as someone.
Okay.
Yes. And so we like people who are engaged fully with us and aligned with us. So that's what I think about. It's like alignment. So that goes all the way from our toes to our head. So you'll notice like we are angling towards each other.
Yep.
It would be hard if I were sitting like this and talking like this to you.
Yeah, I've had interviews like that.
It feels weird, right?
I just feel like
there's something about it.
Just go here, just to align. Yeah,
there is something about it, and I actually, it not only disengages you to me, it also disengages me to you. So, physically aligning. So, as you're talking to someone seated or standing, video or not, like it drives me crazy when I see people on video with their video camera here and they're typing here and they're like, right? Like I love that like this camera is right here. Like I can align with everyone watching to say like, I respect you. I hope you don't use a lot from like, all the way over there. But so physical alignment, toes, torso, head. Toes, torso, head. It's called fronting, right? So angling, we're on the same railroad tracks. That's the very first thing. And you'd be surprised how often we do it accidentally where people will pull back. You think you do this, but you'd be shocked at how often people will pull their shoulder back. It's called blading.
Is that because they're not comfortable or they want to get out of the situation?
Not comfortable, don't want to seem too eager. There's that sort of thing of like, hey, what's up? How
Guys
are ya?
do that a lot, right?
Yeah.
More than girls? Okay.
Yeah. And so you'd be surprised how often you will catch yourself blading, pulling your shoulder back, or even like, leaning back and angling away. So angling forward, eye contact is the next kind of alignment, right? We want to make eye contact. It doesn't have to be 100%.
Right.
So 100% eye contact is actually an invasive cue, right? Like if someone's like staring you down, it's like very weird, right? So it's 60 to 70% eye contact.
Okay.
Right? So as you're meeting, it's so good to see you. It's okay to look away. It's okay to be like, oh my gosh, this is such a great place.
Sure.
60 to 70% eye contact produces oxytocin, which makes us want to connect and bond.
6 to 7.
And then the next, smiling if you feel authentic. I never want someone to be like smiling when they don't feel like smiling. That's actually a bad cue. So
how do you know if someone is having an inauthentic
smile?
smile?
Fake smile doesn't reach all the way up into the upper cheek muscles. So these upper cheek muscles, they pull up your smile. So if I can smile like this. There's no activation out here.
Right.
This is a total fake smile.
Uncomfortable by the way now.
Right. It makes everyone uncomfortable if I'm like, hey, good to see you.
Yeah.
Right? Like that is also a pet peeve if someone walks into a room or hops on a call, hey, yeah, good to see you. It feels bad. I would rather you say, hey, it's nice to see you.
Right.
I would much rather you take away that smile. So if you feel like smiling, great. That's an alignment cue. If you don't, do not fake it till you make it.
Sure.
In that area. Right. Someone is actually happy to see you when it reaches all the way up into that upper
Right. They
face.
got the crows. Yeah.
Crow's feet. Only 1 in 10 people can consciously activate those muscles. So when you see them activated, you almost always know that it's real.
Okay.
It's hard to fake that.
Right.
You can do it with practice. Like I can do it because I've practiced it enough, but it took me like a year.
Yeah, and you're an expert.
Activated.
So most people, you'll know this is the sign. Okay.
And the next one, if you're able to do it, is like vocal alignment. And this is like advanced, right? This is like very advanced. So this is for my people who really want to dial in their communication. So vocal alignment is when you try to match and mirror the voice that you hear, not mimic them. But I'll give you an example. So have you ever seen two girls greet each other where they go, oh my God, it's so good to see you. Hi.
Yeah.
What they're actually doing is vocal alignment. They're actually showing, I love you so much. We're meeting in the same wavelength.
Okay. But so it's not fake, you're saying?
No.
When you see that. This is just...
Humans do this.
Right.
We do this. So I believe there was a study that looked at Larry King interviews. I forgot exactly what it was, but they found that people match the vocal tone, cadence, pitch of the most powerful person in the room.
Got it.
So we are already doing this.
Right.
But I like to bring awareness to it because it's a way that if you're nervous, sometimes you can miss it, right? Like you're so wrapped up in your own nervousness that you're like, a lot of the times people will hold their breath on their first words. They'll go, hey, good to see you.
Right.
And they've like thrown away that first word. So like you have a much more like calm energy.
Yeah.
right? So like when I am talking to you, I bring my vocal tone down. I speak a little bit more calmly. When I'm talking to my girlfriends, I talk much faster, and much more.
Are you?
We very much.
Okay.
So if you go watch an interview with Lisa Bilyeu, so Lisa Bilyeu is one of my girlfriends. I love her. At Impact Theory, you'll notice I talk differently.
It is different then.
I match up because she's up here. She's talking like this. She's huge hand gesture. She's like, "Hey, girl, I'm so excited to have you here," and I am too.
Right.
So like I'm trying to respect you by like matching where where you're at. Because it's your home, it's your interview, right? So I want to match where you're at. And so that's a very advanced way that you can do that.
Got it. Now the reverse. When you're trying to see if someone is trying to, let's say, manipulate you or if someone is lying to you, I'm certainly more on the other side where like I am trying to be more aware of that. But some people are just, they're not there, right? They just kind of miss all these different signals.
Totally.
So what are some of the simple ones that you can look out for that, okay, like this is a pretty obvious signal?
That someone's like, it's a signal of like, I shouldn't trust this person. Is that what we're looking for?
Yeah, more like red flags around that.
Right. So when we're looking for I shouldn't trust this person, what you're looking for is mismatches. So when someone is congruent, their words match their tone, match their body, like it's all in alignment. You're like, yes. When you see mismatches, that's when they're like, what? Like what's happening? So this could happen in a lot of different ways. So the very most obvious way is facial expressions to words. Okay. So if someone says, I'm so happy to be here. And they look so unhappy. Mismatch. Right. So, okay, in that sense, I wouldn't think that they're a con man, but I would think, they're having a hard day and they're trying for me, right? Like I was like, okay, I'm going to try to make it easy on them because they're not having a good time. Right. So someone saying they're happy and not being happy is the first big one. The other one that I look out for a lot is contempt. So contempt is a one-sided mouth raise. So one.
Yep.
We tend to think of it as like a smirk, kind of partial happiness, but actually it's like quite a negative microexpression. It means like disdain or superiority. So people will often do it when they're like, right. Yeah.
You mentioned this in the last one where you were able to predict like a crazy amount of chances that they would be divorced, or just from that one expression.
John Gottman can predict with 93.6% accuracy if a couple will get divorced by looking for contempt.
That's wild.
So that's a mismatch. Someone saying, yes, I love her. Right? Like that's the mismatch. I would want to dig deeper on that. Usually it doesn't happen in that obvious of a way. Usually it's like you're in a meeting and you share an idea and someone goes,
yeah, you got to pay attention, right? To see those.
That's when I'm like, like that idea did not resonate. And that doesn't mean the idea is bad. It means maybe I have to explain it a different way. Maybe they have a question. Maybe they have self-hate. Like you don't always know why the contempt is there, but it's a mismatch of this should be a creative brainstorm session. And for some reason you're showing disdain, superiority, disrespect. So contempt is a mismatch I like to look for. More subtle ones are mismatches in hand gestures or mismatches in body language gestures. So for example, if in this culture, in American culture and Western cultures, this means yes, up and down nod means yes, a horizontal nod means no. It's different in India, Pakistan, and Bulgaria.
Right. India is this is yes.
Yeah, exactly. Could be either. So in Western cultures, so if someone says, I really like her, and they're shaking their head no, that's a little bit of an odd mismatch, right? Like,
do people do that though? Without, they just don't think about it, right?
Oh yeah,
but it just
all the time, because someone's like, so you say, hey, what do you think of the new girl?
Well,
yeah, she's great, right? Because they're like, what do I say? 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 Right? Now you have to be careful because some people use body language gestures as what are called punctuators. Punctuators, like there's a famous interviewer, I forget who it is, either like Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon, where they do this all the time. Like they're constantly shaking their head no. So for them, that's just how they emphasize their words. That wouldn't, but if someone all of a sudden is like, she's great.
Right.
She's great. Right. With like a lip purse, which is like a withholding gesture.
Yeah.
That's like a mismatch. Yeah. Right. Like that's something's not right there. Or liars are very bad with matching their hand gestures to their words. In our lab, we studied liars. I'm fascinated by deceivers because I think it's so interesting what happens to our body in guilt, which is a little bit different than fear. So liars have a really hard time with tense So if something true happened in the past, I use past tense. Oh, what did you do on the night of the incident?
Right.
Well, I went to my girlfriend's house. We watched a movie. We brushed our teeth. We had a little snack. We went to bed. All past. A liar didn't really happen, and they rehearsed parts of it. And so they'll mess up their tenses. What happened the night of the incident? I went over to my girlfriend's house, and we're watching a movie, and we realize we have to brush our teeth. So I brush my teeth. Like the tenses are not right.
Right, because he's actively thinking about it. Okay,
and they're rehearsing, and like and in their mind it's present.
Interesting.
Right. So they mess up tenses and they also mess up gestures. So for example, it's really hard to lie with our gestures. So if I were to say, okay, let's do an experiment. So will you please hold up the number 3 but say 4?
4.
Horrible, right?
Yeah.
4. Just try it. 4.
Yeah, my eyes also just went that way for a little bit. I don't know if you saw it.
So that would probably be like, that's you working really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do that. So if I say I have a big idea, very hard. Like my brain does not like it. And so liars, their gestures are often true.
Huh.
So like you'll see like leaks in mismatches in their gestures or no hand gestures at all.
Yeah, that's
You'll often see like they'll like grip their hands because they don't want to give themselves away.
And the more you know this person and the patterns of how they respond or act, the easier that it is to be able to tell that, right?
Yes. So like in chapter 6, I talk about how to spot a bad guy, right? Like how to spot a bad guy or a bad girl, whatever, which is understanding their patterns, their baselines, and also understanding your own patterns and baselines. So this is not just for others. Like I think it's a fundamental life skill that everyone should know what they do when they lie. So this is a research study that looked at popular kids. Okay.
Like high school or?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
The original connectors, right? So they studied thousands of high school students across a variety of high schools, and they wanted to look for patterns of popularity. Why were certain kids popular in these schools and in grades, in each grade, in each school? And they had hypotheses. They thought, well, maybe they're the smartest. They have the highest GPA. Maybe they're most athletic. They're quarterback or whatever, right? Head cheerleader. Are they the most athletic? Are they the funniest? Are they the tallest? Are they the richest? They looked at all these things that we often think of for being likable, popular, impressive, successful. None of those were patterns.
None of those.
No, there were kids who were popular because they're athletic, but that was not the pattern for all the kids.
Yeah.
There was one single big pattern for all the popular kids across all the schools.
Funny?
Nope. And wouldn't it be horrible if it was funny? How much pressure you have to know that you have to be funny at all times, right? So thank goodness, no.
Yes. Okay. Did we say looks?
Not looks.
Not
that
looks.
was a big hypothesis. Not looks.
That was.
Not
That's what I thought it would be. Okay, those were my
And there were
guesses.
popular kids that were attractive.
Right.
But that wasn't
a
every
consistent
popular kid
pattern.
was attractive.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I was not popular, so this is
Neither
definitely
was
not.
I.
Yeah, I'm not like,
We're like,
what am I? No, I'm having to guess very far away from. What
I was the
could
same. Why do you think I read this study like with bated breath? I was like, what is
You said you
it?
changed your lives. I
Yes.
was like, yeah, it would have.
I wish I read this in high school, actually, but I didn't. It wasn't out then.
No, I feel you.
So the pattern was the popular kids had the longest list of other kids that they liked. That one of the things they asked every kid was list all the kids in your school that you like. And the popular kids had the longest list. In other words, they were not going around being the funniest, the smartest, the most impressive. All they were doing was thinking of all the ways they could like people more.
Super interesting. How to win friends that influence people, basically.
The funny thing is, like, he never put it quite that succinctly, Dale Carnegie. Like, he never said, like, forget being impressive. In fact, that was not the message of his book. He often said, like, tell stories, be impressive. And this is hard.
Right.
Like, some Dale Carnegie's advice is hard.
It's pretty hard, yeah.
Right. Or, like, be interested. That's part of it. But it's literally just trying to like the person you're with.
That's it.
Forget about impressing them. Forget about being funny. Forget about mentioning all your cool things. No. It's literally just, how can I like you more? That is actually the key to likability. And so I think that is the only way I was able to get out of my imposter syndrome, is it took all the pressure off of having to be great.
That's so interesting. We all just want to be loved.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
And like,
to be loved.
I like you.
Yeah.
That phrase, that feeling is the most powerful feeling in the world.
Yeah.
If you share I like you with someone else, you give them permission to be themselves. You are saying, I like you just as you are. You are worthy and you are valued. That is the greatest gift you can give someone. That's all we want, interaction. The other person does not want to hear how amazing you are. Maybe they want to laugh, but like that's not why they're there. All they want to do is, do you like me? 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 And so the sooner you can find a reason to like them and share that you like them, the more likable you are.
Right. And it's so funny because you would always think that the more successful someone is or the more money someone has, sometimes it's even the extreme case. Like those people need way more validation. And when I think about like, how do you surround yourself with people that are way more successful than you, is like, it is kind of your advice, right? It's just make them feel heard. You make them feel important.
And find authentic reasons to like them. Like think about the people you like most. They're often like not the richest or the prettiest or the funniest, but you just genuinely like them for who they are. There's a reason for that, right? Like, so I think that imposter syndrome is like, forget trying to even show someone you're great or be great. It just takes that whole paradigm and throws it out the window.
That's so interesting. Get out of your head and more into your heart at the end of the day. Wow.
So you started working with the NYPD and you transitioned into the U.S. Secret Service agent, where you were protecting former U.S. presidents. And I guess I would love to dig into initially like how you got into the NYPD and where that transition went into NYPD into working in one of the top protection divisions, probably around the world.
So actually, when I graduated college, I got a job working for a big insurance company, a great company, AIG. And much respect to AIG. Well, my job it was one of my first jobs out of college, and it was underwriting and accounting. Nothing really in my, nothing really pertained to what I studied. But I remember taking the train and going to the job, and it was a traditional job working out of a cubicle. And it was very difficult for me to kind of wrap my mind around. And I remember sitting on the subway, actually, at that time, taking the train into work, which was all the way downtown by Wall Street. And I remember thinking, I can't do this. And I remember the subway doors opening. And as I looked out, I saw this police officer. And this was some time ago. And he's leaning on the rails there by the subway, and his belly's hanging out. And he's just leaning back there. And I thought to myself, I can do that. And so, and I always had this draw into being of service and helping people. So that night I called 212 Recruit, which was the police phone number for recruitment. I said, hi, I want to be a police officer. What do I do? And the guy on the phone said, well, you're in luck. The police exam is in a week or next week. Come take it. So he's like, what's your name? I give him my name. He said, this is where you're going to go, and you're going to take your police test. And I literally just rolled in the following week, sat down, didn't know anything from anything, and I took my police test.
What's in the test?
And that started my journey. I didn't. It was like some type of, it's like their intake process. So I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of literature out there for stuff like this. So I really went in on the blind and I took it. Thankfully, I had passed the written exam. And then after that follows a series of testing that the NYPD does to see if you make it through their process. So I began that process. I made it, and I was offered an opportunity to be a cadet. So I went through that recruitment process. But as I had done that, when I had finished college, I also just blasted out my resumes to everybody and anybody. And I remember thinking, someone's going to hire me. And one of the agencies that I blasted out to happened to also be in the Secret Service, which is ironic because it was all in the space of law enforcement.
Wow. So
I get into the NYPD. Secret Service starts hitting me up. I start getting letters from them. And then I began that process. And that took about a year. And it's a very lengthy process. Obviously, it's a highly coveted job. So you do interviews, quite a few interviews. You do physical checks to make sure you're physically capable of doing the job. Those types of jobs that you must be physically capable. You must be able to perform. It's not just about having the mental capacity, but the physical capacity. And then there's polygraph testing, background, investigations, because a lot of people, and I think the data actually says about 75% of people either lie or exaggerate on their resumes. So it's a really important
75.
thing for them to check the veracity of what you write, whether you're being truthful or not. And so that began my journey from pretty much college to NYPD to US Secret Service. And it's also, I think a lot of things that helped me go along or get into this space, into a highly coveted agency, is I did speak multiple languages. I always loved languages. So I spoke multiple languages. And I had worked for a congresswoman at the time for 2 years for free. For free. And I always knew I'm investing in myself. Whereas a lot of individuals around me, were very money focused. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I was always self-investment focused. And I knew I'm building myself and I'm making myself look unique so that when I go out there into the world, my resume will stand out compared to other people's resumes, because it's not just enough to get good grades anymore. Or even then, good grades are just not enough, right? It's what makes you shine, or what's going to make somebody look at you and say, this person has something unique, and I think I want it.
Getting into the NYPD in the first place, I mean, I understand the current job that you had in AIG wasn't the most attractive thing that you wanted to do, that you set out for yourself. But do you think there's something about you that attracted you to being in the NYPD? Because it's not necessarily the path that everybody tries to go to, especially when it's because it's such a male dominating workload, in terms of the career itself. So what do you think it was about your experiences, whether as a child or just growing up, that really pushed you to enter that field?
I grew up in a very high crime environment. I was born and raised in New York City. I was actually born in Harlem. And my family lived in Washington Heights area, which was very high crime. It was a very heavy immigrant area. And we also lived in low income housing, which is government subsidized housing or city subsidized housing. And so at that time, you didn't see a lot of police vehicles there. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of crime. And those were neighborhoods that were kind of left on their own. And I grew up I never played outside because it was unsafe. It was just hurry up, go inside the house. The TV was my escape, honestly. So I think it comes from that. You get tired of being told, be afraid, don't do this, don't do that. It's dangerous outside. And at some point, you either surrender to the fear and you become more afraid, or you rebel against it. And I believe for me, I just began to rebel. I got tired of being told, you can't. And you hit a point where I wanted to be able to take care of myself. And then also, when you see people around you being highly victimized, it's a very hard thing to watch. And I think intuitively, without me realizing it, that's what led me into law enforcement. Now, as far as NYPD at that time being very, in law enforcement in general, being very, heavily dominated by men, that never once crossed my mind. I never thought about it. I didn't care. I really never even thought about it. Although I grew up with parents who were immigrants and there's cultural things there, they never told me, don't do this because you're a woman. I will say that. My father never told me, you're a woman, you can't do this. I never once heard that. Wow. And so I think that played a huge role in my mindset. So I also grew up learning about Greek mythology and culture I came from. There were a lot of warriors and fighting. And so I always saw myself, those are my ancestors and I'm like that. So when you think of King Leonidas from Sparta, and when you think of Achilles, and you think of these historical figures who really just left an imprint throughout history, I guess I saw myself in that way. I never thought, they're men and I'm just a woman. Never. And I think perhaps that ignorance that I grew up with is what helped me, because it never caused me to pause. I was always like, well, why not? Why can't I? I'm very capable.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, where mindset really plays a role, because we tend to kill our dreams. We always think other people kill it for us. No, we kill it first. We're the biggest dream killers, because nobody can really kill your dreams unless you allow them. So it always comes from you.
Yeah, you say ignorance, but I guess it's more that you just didn't put a ceiling on yourself. There wasn't the limiting belief that probably majority of the people have growing up. It was, you just didn't place that limit on yourself at the end of the day.
It wasn't even in my sphere. It wasn't even in my sphere. It's not nothing I gave a thought to. I never thought that there's nothing. I always thought my mindset was I'm capable of anything I want to do. Now, whether I do it or not is a whole other story, but I was never going to be the one who said no. No would come from somewhere else, but never from me.
Right.
And even sometimes when somebody says no to me, I don't hear no. I hear not yet.
Powerful. Yeah. And that's what allowed you to start in the NYPD and get to the Secret Service. And now, at that point of your career, transition from, NYPD to now serving one of the most powerful people in the world. What was that mindset shift like? You were in NYPD, the focus was around protecting everyday consumers, and when you got into the Secret Service agency in the what's the division called? I don't want to keep
No, that's okay. So yeah. NYPD, you're correct. NYPD deals with the protection of civilians, right? You're there to serve society. And actually policing, when we look at policing, the history of policing, private police came first. And so historically, people who had money could pay to have police. That's how it started. And people looked around, certain people looked around at the time and said, this isn't fair. What about the average person? And so that's what gave birth to public policing. Public policing wasn't a thing. Policing was for people who had wealth. Wealthy people could pay for security. Everybody else, too bad. So we have the emergence of public policing, which is now for everybody, right? No matter who you are, no matter how much you make, you have access to safety and security. That's the idea. So when you move into an agency like the U.S. Secret Service, now you're moving onto a federal level. So it's a much smaller agency. If you look at NYPD, you're looking anywhere between 35,000 to 40,000 officers. It fluctuates. U.S. Secret Service, you're looking at a couple of thousand special agents, and that's it. So it's a really elite organization. It's actually harder to get into the service than it is to get into Harvard or any one of the other Ivy League schools. It's a very difficult place because a lot of people look at that job and think, wow, that's a place I'd like to go to, just because of the mindset, the access, what you're doing. These types of jobs, they entice a certain type of person.
Yeah.
So it's not for everyone.
No, yeah. No, definitely not. And they filtered you out for the right reasons. And when it comes to privacy, when for the 13 years that you were serving, I mean, at that point, is there some sort of security breach if you were to publicize that you're in charge of protecting the U.S. president at that time? Because I guess I could see that as someone trying to perhaps, approach you or get into your personal social life because they can get closer to the president. Did not a lot of people know what you were actually doing? And did most people not know that you were serving and protecting the president for the first, the 13 years that you were actually performing that role?
I think it's not a secret job. So it's not like when you work for the Central Intelligence Agency where, in that agency, they definitely want you to be a bit more quiet with your status because you're working in the space of espionage. You're trying to flip people. You're trying to turn people, especially foreign assets. So because you're dealing in that international space, it's much more delicate. With the Secret Service, it's not that it was secret. It was known if you were an agent. So for myself, people knew I was a special agent, but I did not share what I did or where I went or what I was doing. You knew, you used common sense not to share information. So I wouldn't say, hey, I'm going here with the president because for the obvious reasons.
Yeah.
You don't share that stuff. So you learn the tone of what you should or should not share. So me personally, I really didn't share anything public while I was in that position.
That transition that you made from, let's say, if you were to look back at yourself serving as NYPD all the way up to serving the most powerful person in the world, what do you think are the differences in the skills that you've had to acquire, whether that's like hard skills or perhaps physical traits or mental traits, characteristics that you've had to either learn completely or accelerate in order to perform at the highest level? What do you think those are, or those were?
I'll tell you, there is a difference between being in that space and then being in civilian world, because after I left the service and began working in TV and news and media, covering national security and crime, I had to transition from working with a certain type of person, which they were special agents and people within the White House, to civilians, to the everyday individuals. I will say that when you are in that space, the space that I came from, there's a much more resilient mindset. Whereas you don't get fazed by things because you're trained for when things break bad, you respond. So you don't get flustered. There's less drama around you because even though there's drama around you, you don't absorb that drama. So there's a truly resilient mindset. And the other thing that I really think is fascinating is you are able to think through crisis. Whereas the majority of people, because you don't have that training and exposure, people struggle with crisis. They get very emotional based. They go into they kind of go in within. Whereas when you're in that space, you look at the collective mission. What is my goal? What is my output? Where am I looking to go? And you're less distracted by the noise or people around you. You're less impacted by it. So you work with people who move through problems. Society today tells you, stay away from stress. Stay away from stress. Stress is bad. Ooh, adversity is bad. But training is designed to put stress on you. The more stress you expose yourself to, the better you become at problem solving, at moving and flowing through problems. But if you spend your whole time, your whole life avoiding conflict, avoiding stress, avoiding, one, it's exhausting. Two, it's actually more stressful because it's chronic, because you're actually putting more energy in trying to endure really bad situations. And when you can deal with a problem, you become a better problem solver.
Yeah.
So I came from a space where problems are good, you work through them. That's resilience. Resilience isn't a mindset. Think this and you'll be strong. It's garbage. You must do. To be resilient, you actually must actively do things that make you resilient, that add to you. But thinking myself strong and actually being strong are two completely different things.
Can you define what an optimist is?
So an optimist is simply someone who has positive expectations of the future.
Right, because I think we mostly think about people that are happy all the time, or someone that might be always smiling, but it's more of like a mental thinking process of their future. That's kind of the difference.
Yeah, and there is a relationship between optimism and happiness because if you're an optimist and you have positive expectations of the future, that tends to make you happy at the moment, right? So there is a correlation between the two, but it is not the same thing. One can cause the other. But I mean, also it is true that happiness can cause optimism. So if I'm in a positive mood and I'm happy, that can then trigger more positive expectations of the future.
Yeah, and you say here that about 80% of people are optimists. But some people would, I guess, argue they look at the media, they look at the news, and there's a lot of negative pessimism going around the economy, around people doubting that they should even have children because they don't want to bring people into the world of AI robots. So people have this pessimism, it seems, especially with the media and the news that are going around. So is there a difference between how, despite 80% of people being optimists, how people can perceive outside of things, outside of their own control, as more pessimistic versus maybe their own futures?
Yeah, so we call this private optimism, but public despair. So people tend to be quite optimistic about their own life and their own experiences. And even in the private domain, I mean, it's not that you're optimist about every part of your life all the time, right? I mean, it's just on average, people tend to be more optimistic than not. And again, it could be that you're optimistic in your professional life, but not in your personal, like, romantic relationships or something like that. But on average, people tend to be optimistic about their own prospects, on average. And at the same time, on average, they do not tend to be optimistic about public questions, right? Questions about what's going to happen to my country, where is my leaders taking me, and so on. Climate change. So there's definitely this, what seems like a contradiction, but can be explained in several ways. The first is, as you mentioned, is control. The reason we are optimistic about our own life is that we have a sense that we're in control of events that happen in our life, more so than we actually do have control. And right. If we have control, that means we can steer the wheel in the right direction. And so we're optimistic about the potential outcomes. When it comes to public events, we do not have control. And even if we're overestimating our control, even in public, we most of us realize that we don't have much control. And that means that there's no reason for us to imagine that the outcome will be positive. That's the first reason why there's a dissociation. The second reason is, in fact, to believe that you will be doing well while other people on average will not, in fact, puts you in an even better situation, right? I'm doing well despite the fact that the world is going to,
interesting.
downhill.
Okay.
People tend to estimate where they are relative to others. And if you ask people, do you prefer to, make 100,000 a year when everyone else is making 150, or make 70 a year when everyone else is making 30? And all else being equal in terms of how much a dollar is worth in terms of power of purchase, they prefer to gain a little bit less as long as there are like the big fish, right? Oh, how do you measure mental health? There's a lot of questionnaires that looks at psychopathology symptoms. So there's a whole battery of questionnaires that you could give someone, and you can score their mental health on different dimensions. So you could look at things like depression and anxiety, but also like OCD, like everything. There's a questionnaire, and you can give that out. That would be, and some people do that. You could also do things like just more simple questions like mood, for example. Right? Just ask people about their mood. So that's not as good, but it takes less time to get the data.
Is that how they measure? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that how they measure like happiest countries in the world? I think like Finland or Sweden, one of these countries ranks top 3 countries that are ranked happiest in the world like every single year. Is that similar data that they get? Because I always wonder like how they measure that. I mean, they rarely see the sun. I mean, it's kind of tough to claim that they're the happiest. It's hard to believe, honestly.
It's hard to believe. For that, they usually use a single question. Normally, if I remember correctly, it's something like imagine life as a ladder. Like, the top is like the happiest you could be. The bottom is like the most miserable, like where you are on the ladder. And then you put yourself on a ladder. That's a very common one. So it's something along those lines. Yeah, it's usually a single question that they ask a whole lot of people. They try to do a good sample, right? A reflective sample of the population. Yeah, so those are different ways to measure mental health. You can also look at things like diagnosis. That is a little bit problematic because if diagnosis is greater, like more people are diagnosed with mental health problems, it could be just that now we tend to diagnose people more, right? Rather than actual people having more mental health. So studies definitely show that mental health has been deteriorating. Especially that's true in younger individuals, teenagers, early 20s. When it began coincides with when social media began. There's other very, to me, convincing pieces that suggest that there is a tight link between social media and mental health. For example, there are studies where people were asked, how much money would you take to not use social media for a certain amount of time, a few months? They say how much they want, and then they divide the people to 2 groups. One group, they pay them to go off social media, and the other group, I think they still pay them, but they don't go off social media. Anyway, they try to control it as much as they can. And what they find is those people who go off social media for those few months feel better. They do better in every way that you measure it. They're happier. They're interacting more with others. In every way, they are doing better.
I want to shift to decision making a little bit and relate that to optimism, where, when we're making these like big decisions, and kind of going back to negative visualization. So my mom is facing a lot of issues with her hands with arthritis, and I'm trying to convince her to get into stem cell therapy, which in the US is very different than different parts around the world. And obviously, for her not having heard that, it is kind of like a nerve-wracking thing, because there is a hefty cost. There's no guarantee that it's going to succeed. And instead of looking at the bright side all the time, we kind of did the opposite effect of like, okay, what's the worst case scenario? Is like you tried something, there isn't any solutions in the US or Canada, but worst case, you lose, some money, which isn't life-changing money, but it is a significant amount. But that is the worst case scenario. It's very less invasive than surgery. Are there things like that, like frameworks that we should use? And do we make better decisions when we're more realistic versus constantly being optimistic?
I don't think there's like a straightforward answer to that. As we said, I mean, it definitely matters what exactly the context is and so on. As we said before, you will take more risk if you're an optimist and if you look at it in an optimistic way. And that means that sometimes you will win, right? And sometimes you will fail. So, and most of the time it's like, it's uncertain. So it's, you don't know what it's hard to know like what the actual risk, like what is the probabilities of each of these options, like what they call ambiguity. We don't even know what the risk is on most of these things. So it's a little bit hard to say. It's, the way that usually people say how you make decisions is you multiply the gain by the probability of the gain, and you add the loss times the probability of the loss. And if that is a positive number, you should do it, right? So that's just like what is the utility? What is the value of an action? In your case, the action is stem cell therapy. So what is the gain? The gain is that she will not have this problem. And so she needs to think about like what is the value of that gain, right? I guess you can kind of like put it in dollars, I guess. Like, if she would have been cured, how much would that mean to her? Let's say you're like $1 million, multiply it by what is the probability that would happen? Maybe it's 20%. So you do 0 times 2. Now, the likelihood of the loss will be like nothing happens. What does it cost? The amount of therapy costs, maybe it's $100,000 multiplied by the likelihood that this will happen, 0.8. And then you just add these two things up and you see if it's a positive number or if it's a negative number. If it's a positive number, she should go ahead and do it. If it's a negative number, she shouldn't. Of course, it could be something in between. You could be like, oh, and actually it's like this one is 10% and this one is like 50% because in the middle are all the other option, which is like, well, it helps me, but just a little bit. So I won't feel it in the morning, but I'll feel it in the evening, right? And so what is the value of that? What is the probability of that? And so you can go for all of those things. But of course, everything is like so subjective. Like, how do you put a number on all of these things? How do you know exactly the probabilities? But, in theory, that's the way that people should be making decisions. An optimist will think the likelihood of a bad thing happening is low. It's not someone who would say, I don't care if a bad thing happens, right? So the value that I put on, let's say, this is not necessarily true, but you say, oh, okay, at this operation, you might lose your hand. Okay, so you need to figure out whether it's worth it for you. And there's some benefit. You're doing it for some benefit. So what the question is, what is the loss for losing your hand? You have to put a number of it. So you can put like, for me, it's minus 2 million. For you, it's minus 1 million. That does not mean which of us is an optimist. What determines which is like, what is the probability you think you will lose your hand versus what probability I think I'll lose your hand. So it's not that optimists don't care about losses or care more about gains. It's just like, what do we expect will and will not happen? So it's that probability part of the equation that will change for the optimist, not the value.
There's just certain ideas or actions when you give people ownership of that, they're more likely to follow through with it. Could the same be said? Well, can you actually explain that actually first? And can you explain how that could relate to persuasion and helping people to take actions on things that you want them to do?
Yeah, so people are more motivated when they choose the course of action themselves. So let's say you have an employee, they have like 2 projects that they could work on. If you tell them what to do, they will be less motivated than if they choose it themselves, even if they choose the same thing that you were about to give them anyway, right? So when someone makes a choice, they tend to appreciate it more, partially because they quickly reevaluate the options after they made a choice to convince themselves that they did the correct choice, right? So if you're like, should I go to London for this project, or should I like go to New York for this other project? And they're both good and they're great. You don't know what to choose. And you say, okay, fine, I'm going to choose New York. What people do, they rationalize, why New York is good. And they say, okay, London is gray and rainy. I'm not going to be happy there. The project in New York is like more exciting. So now they appreciate it more because they went through this rationalization approach, which they don't usually do if someone else makes a choice for them, because they don't need to rationalize a choice because it was someone else's choice altogether. So people, and that's true for whether it is choosing something, but it's also true for whether you make something. So if you made something, you made it yourself, you tend to appreciate it more versus the exact same thing that someone gave to you. That actually we tend to think is because if you do something yourself, you actually you've learned something, you have a blueprint. So it actually makes sense. Right? As you say, the IKEA effect, like the IKEA effect is like you buy something at IKEA, you make it yourself, you value it more than if like you just got the same thing made.
Even if it's worse quality, right? Even if you just completely messed up and you're not handyman like me.
And there's many reasons for this. It's like, well, you put in the effort, so now it's worth more because it's not only like the pieces of wood, but it's like your time, your effort. It's also more related to you, right? So you like people, things that are related to the self are valued more. So now this IKEA thing, it has memories, right? It's related to me. But also I've learned something from it, right? For sure. So now there's a value not only in the object, but also in the experience.
It's kind of like a chicken and an egg, right? Knowing that you're going to mirror and also the other person is going to mirror based on how how much warmer you are, how competent you're trying to sound. They're also going to mirror that. So do you try to set the tone and just kind of stick to it, or do you try to mingle around?
So I always say you want to hit the sweet spot. And by the way, everyone is a little bit different. So if someone's naturally higher in warmth, you're going to be trying to add competence cues purposefully. So the closer to the middle you can get, the better. If you are with someone or talking to someone and you notice, wow, they are highly warm just like me, or they are highly competent just like me, you can dial into them to respect them. I think that when we talk about mirroring and matching, that's a respect issue. It's basically saying to someone, I respect you so much that I'm going to mirror and match where you're at. So I would say the default is always that balance, trying to hit that perfect balance of warmth and competence, and then flexing depending on your goals. What are your goals? Do you want to make them feel comfortable, or do you want to be as charismatic as possible? There are 2 ways that we show facial expressions or emotions. One is contempt. However, we don't always know where that contempt comes from. So for example, you might watch yourself on a video call, or watch, let's say someone else, let's not make it personal. Let's say that you see someone on a video call and they show contempt, right? They flash a one-sided mouth raise on the other side. Right. And you go, oh, they hate me. Or they hate the person that's talking. Yeah. We don't know the source of the contempt. So it could be contemptuous of the person talking. It could be contemptuous of the news they delivered. It could be that they're really hungry and they're contemptuous of that. They could have had a self-hatred thought. Right. So you even have people who have a lot of self-hatred, a lot of pessimism, a lot of depression. They will show more contempt, but it has nothing to do with other people. It's their own. It's a manifestation of their own internal feeling. So when you're looking for contempt, it's not one and done. It's, they just showed contempt in the part of the meeting where Sarah was talking and we were talking about budget. I wonder why. Is it Sarah? Is it the budget? Is something at home? I'm going to keep watching. Or I'm going to pause and say, hey, any questions here? Does this budget make sense? And that person says, here's what doesn't make sense to me. That was what caught them up. Or no questions from me. I wonder why. Let's keep watching. So we're looking for clusters of these cues. the backup science here, which I just want to be super accurate. I think that when we're cue readers, we have to make sure that we're being as nuanced as possible, is there is a very small portion of the population that uses contempt as a punctuator. That's what that's called, a facial punctuators. Yeah, so a punctuator is that they use a facial expression all the time as like a default. It's almost like someone who's like a fidgeter. So for example, I have a friend who uses the disgust facial expression as his punctuator. So disgust, if you want to try it with me, it's when we raise our nose up, we crinkle our nose, and we flash the whites of our teeth. So this is disgust, like we smell something bad, we go, oh.
Right.
Oh.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a very negative expression. So you'll see this oftentimes when you ask someone, so, what do you think of the new girl? And they go, oh, yeah, she's pretty good. And no, they're pretty disgusted by that person.
Yeah.
Well, my friend who uses that as his punctuator all the time, so how's it going? Oh, good. All the time he's in that disgust facial expression. So for him, I know that's his punctuator. It's very, very deep science there, but I think it helps us be more accurate.
What are some of the things that people can do listening today, the single folks that are trying to put themselves in the best light, or maybe like not overdo it either, so that the reality meets what actually shows in photos, which is also another problem in online dating. Talk to us a little bit about kind of the things that you've researched or learned about online dating photos.
Oh man, there's so much juicy research on online dating because it's a really easy thing to study. So there's actually some really great research out there. Here's a fun one. I'll start with the fun one, then we'll go to the serious ones. Okay, so the fun one, I put this one in my book because I just had to. My editor was like, Vanessa, I was like, this is so amazing and funny. One research study, yes, there was actually a research study that looked at men, heterosexual single men holding cats. Because the hypothesis was that if you hold a cat, do women, these are only heterosexual males, do women perceive that man as being softer, right? Is it a warmth cue? That's what they were looking for. So can you guess, Sean, should a heterosexual male hold a cat? Is it warm and fuzzy, or is it not so good? What do you think?
Oh, I mean, I noticed you didn't include dogs in there.
I did not include dogs.
You did not include dogs in there. So my intuition would say dogs are generally warm and fuzzy. So cats, I guess not. But I would imagine most people would say that it's a warm and fuzzy thing, right?
So you are right. Most people think that it's warm and fuzzy, but you should never hold a cat.
Ever.
If you are a heterosexual male, do not hold a cat. Even women who like cats don't like a man who holds a cat.
Really? Wow.
This is according to one research study. But the reason why I like these kind of things is because it shows you the power of a cue, right? So if we are looking at someone's profile photo really fast, our brain is trying to take in as many of those cues as we possibly can. So it's not just your face and your body and what's behind you and what you're holding and your clothes. It's all of those things put together. So what I would do if I were you is I would open up your profile photos or the profile photos you're thinking about using, and I would try to, again, do a little profile photo audit. How many warmth cues are you sending? How many competence cues are you sending? There's actually an exercise I like people to do while they're reading, because as they find a cue in the book, they can give it a point on the picture. So for example, one that we see a lot in female pictures, in fact, one of the studies we talk about is that this cue is in thousands of paintings over the last couple hundred years because it's so often used to depict people, which is a highly warmth cue, a head tilt. So women especially, we love a head tilt in our profile photos. Whenever I look at my friends' dating apps, I love looking over the shoulder of my single friends and just trying to help them pick cues. Woman after woman is always with their head.
Yep.
Why is this so? So a head tilt is a universal cue that we do when we're trying to hear something better. So if I were to say, do you hear that? Like, do you hear my daughter yelling in the background?
Right. I'll go.
You tilt your head up. And that's because logically this makes sense. We want to expose our ear. My hair then falls away from my ear, so I have less blocking it, so I can take in as much hearing as possible. So we recognize the head tilt as a universal I'm listening cue. And what do we want most in a partner? To feel like we're being listened to. And so the reason why a lot of people, especially women, will default to a head tilt is because it is a warmth cue. And women by default typically want to be warmer.
Sure.
This is not good or bad, but I think it's something to consider when you're looking at your pictures. Does that make sense?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I do notice this. Like a lot of mostly girls, right? Yeah, I don't see a lot of guys doing this for sure.
Well, this is where I think we can really level up our game here. So first of all, if you're a female and you like the head tilt and you want to do it in your profile photos, great. Just know it's a high warmth cue, right? It literally is like, I'm listening to you. I'm going to be a great listener. I am warm to you. So just be aware of what you're sending if you want to do that. For men, and by the way, the degree of the head tilt is important, right? Like the farther over that I go, the more ditzy I look. Like
yeah.
Right? So if I were to have my head tilted all the way over, I am higher in warmth. The less I tilt, the less warm I am until I'm back in equal. Right? It's literally a degree. If you were to see a girl who had her entire head exposed, especially laughing with an open mouth,
yeah,
right? That's the ultimate. She is really high in warmth, all the way warm to ditzy. Right? We worry, right? We go all the way.
Wrong angle to use on LinkedIn.
Exactly. Exactly what the cues you use in your dating profile should be totally different than your LinkedIn profile. In fact, those should be very different pictures. They should be different pictures. Yeah. For men, a head tilt is a great back pocket secret cue because it's a warmth cue. And a lot of men are overly competent in their photos. They usually will do their head straight, usually not smiling, kind of like a smize, right? Serious. If they had their guns showing, maybe their closed body with their guns showing, maybe they're not even making eye contact, they're looking off into the sunset. Yeah. High competence. High competence, which for someone looking, whether male or female, whether if you're homosexual or heterosexual, is that what you want to attract? Right? If you are using all competence cues, you are going to signal high competence, and that means you're only going to get people who are high competence.
Right.
So it's just about thinking about what kind of person do you want to attract and what cues are you using to signal that. So a warmth cue for a man, a subtle one, not, all the way over, just a subtle one can be a great way to add a little bit of warmth. If you have been told you're cold or intimidating, or you feel like you have trust issues in your relationship, maybe try to add in more head tilts because it's going to warm you up.
Powerful. This is why we love having you on. So let's kind of continue on to this topic where, so you've got the online dating, you followed Vanessa's advice, nailed the date, and you've got a physical date now. You're in your first date. Where do you sit on the table? This is something that I'm always curious about. Like, I've almost had like better interactions when I'm sitting right beside them sometimes, but it's kind of been a mix, right? Sometimes you want to sit right across from them. I would love to kind of go into that.
I have a graphic for you. I have a graphic for you. So I have the same exact problem, right? Anxiety comes when we don't understand something or don't know something. Okay. So there is research on seating science. If you can believe it, there is research on seating science. So the first thing we should know is that when we're talking about interactions between humans, there's actually 4 different zones of space. So these are the 4 different zones of space. So very basically, and these numbers change a little bit based on culture. The brackets are about the same. So I'm going to give you some averages. Sure. So first we have the intimate zone. The intimate zone is 0 to 18 inches apart. So 0 to 18 inches apart is about here. And that is because when someone's in your intimate zone, you can basically smell their breath, right? Like if someone's in your intimate zone, you're probably going to go in for a kiss. Right. So that's why it's called the intimate zone, is because you're very close, you're making lots of eye contact. And it's usually where we're in pre-kissing mode. So 0 to 18 inches is the first zone. That's the intimate zone. The second zone is the personal zone. This is about 1.5 to 3 feet away. So leaving the intimate zone about 3 feet away. Then there's the social zone, which is about 6 feet away. That's where we've been social distancing, right? Like just far enough. And then beyond 7 feet is the public zone. Why are these important? That depends on where you sit. So if you want to create intimacy with someone, you want to be in a seat that is closer to them. Not too close, right? Like, by the way, I think this is the secret reason why at bars, when people are sitting right up next to each other in bar stools, they become immediately close. This is why you spill your life story to the person sitting next to you at a bar, is you are forced into intimate zone. I literally... It's like a byproduct of our space. It's the same reason why loud bars and nightclubs work so well for creating intimacy. Why so many people go home after them is because it's really loud. So what do? What was that? Right? Like the moment it's loud, you lean in And if you've noticed at a loud bar or nightclub or networking event, you're in someone's intimate zone talking into their ear, basically.
Right.
And that intimate zone creates a sense of intimacy. So the first thing I want you to think about for seats is, what kind of intimacy do you want to create? If it's a slow grow, right? If it's like, we're just getting to know each other, she or he has been in some hard relationships, maybe that 3 foot is great, like across the table or corner to corner. If you are like, no, like we're really hitting it off, I want to get close and I want to get close fast, like consider sitting next to each other at a bar. Consider sitting next to each other in a booth. Consider sliding your chair over to sit closer to them. The second thing to consider is angles. So when we are with someone and fully aligned with them, our body is also fully aligned with them. So you'll notice that people tend to angle their toes towards their crush.
Yeah.
So this is anecdotal. I don't know if I mentioned this in the last video, that when we really like someone, even we're tuned to our boss, like we're really the VIP in the room, we will subtly angle our toes towards that person just because our brain is sort of on them. Yeah. So the thing to think about is, wherever you're sitting at the table, you want to try to angle your body, your toes, your torso, and your head so that you're in full parallel lines with theirs. Yeah. That is a way to literally show someone, I'm on the same page as you. I am so aligned with you and so into you that I literally want to stand as you stand. I want to sit as you sit. It's less about mirroring and more about alignment, that parallel, those parallel lines. So wherever you are, make sure you try to get parallel.
Got it.
I have a diagram for business seating, but I don't think we're talking about business seating, but it's also critical to think about where you want to sit around a conference table too. That's also a very important aspect of meetings.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that. I mean, I actually just had one question around the dating aspect, because I've heard that for when guys interact with guy friends, like guys don't always kind of sit face to face. They like to sit side by side and like,
that's right.
Like, what did you do? And that's just a little bit more comfortable. But is that actually hurting them when they're in a date with someone that you're trying to pursue romantically?
Yes, exactly. So the reason why two friends, male, female, female, often will sit next to each other in a car, at the bar, walking down the street, and they're talking like this, is because they're not going in for a kiss. They're not trying to create. So, like, when we're on parallel lines, it means we're trying to get intimate, right? Like that's kind of what we're trying to say to someone. And so with friends, it's okay that you're not going to be physically intimate. You're trying to be emotionally intimate. So it's okay that you're not totally aligned, as long as you're not across the room yelling at each other, right? You're still in each other's personal or social space, which is still okay.
Got it. I'm just looking at the time right now, Vanessa. I actually had some interesting questions that I wanted to ask you, or really more a breakdown. So I've kind of selected some of the most awkward, common situations that most people go through, and maybe we can just kind of sprinkle in some of the things you found with cues. So probably the most common one that most people go through is asking for a salary increase, right? So you're in a room with your boss, or maybe you're on Zoom. What are some of the things that people can do on the other end to ensure that they have, a higher likelihood of getting that raise?
Yes, actually, at one point, I hope I can remember all the tips. I filmed a whole 30-minute tutorial on how to raise your rates or ask for a raise, because there's a lot of things that you can do both in prep and the actual meeting. But from a cues perspective, the most important thing you want to do is trigger the actual feelings you want your boss to feel. What I mean by this is, I think the mistake that most people make when they go into either raise their rates or ask for a raise is they'll use negative words because they're trying to show, if you don't give me a raise, this thing will happen. So not threatening exactly, but they'll say something like, I love working at the company, but I've really felt overworked. It's been a really tough year, and, I want to stay at the company, but I just don't know if, I'm feeling a little disengaged. And so one thing that's really important to me is I want to talk about our compensation package. So they're using words that are slightly negative because they're trying to justify why they want to raise their rates. Right. But I actually want you to think of, or they'll use really, really positive words, which is good, but they're all focused on their own feelings. So I've been working really hard. I've been working lots of long hours. I feel like I'm giving a lot to the company. So they're using a lot of positive words that are for them. What I want you to think about is, what feeling do you want your boss to have to feel empowered to give you the raise? And this depends on your company. So if you know that your company is in high, fast growth, like some companies over the last few years are just growing like crazy, then you would want to stimulate that growth, right? You want to use all those growth words. So we've been, killing it. It's been amazing. We've been growing so fast. I love the trajectory of the company. That way you're reminding your boss of all the things that are growth related, lots of money, lots of opportunities, and hoping to empower them to make a decision from that place. On the other hand, let's say things aren't going so well at the company, where there's what is everyone calling it now? The Great Resignation, right? Everyone's resigning all the time. And again, the mistake here would be to mention the Great Resignation, right? Because that's going to trigger fear. A boss usually does not want to make or give a raise out of fear, right? You don't want to get a raise. Very few people are going to give a raise out of scarcity or fear mindset. So you don't want to talk about that, but you do want to talk about solutions. If your boss is trying to head up a company that's struggling, they want to hear relief. They want help. They want solutions. So the words you'd want to use for that kind of boss would be, I want to help in 2022. I want to step up. I want to make sure that I'm a leader in this company, that I'm your right hand, that I'm supporting you as much as possible as we keep growing. So you're using solution, relief, together, solve, because what does a boss want? A solution, a partner, someone who's going to help them solve something. So I want you to think about what kind of emotions would your boss want to be in. What I talk about in the verbal section of cues is that the words you use are often contagious. So if you show up to a meeting and you're saying, oh, I've been so stressed, just been so busy, man, it's been rough. What a challenging time. Those words trigger all of those feelings of stress and problem and challenge. And so the words you use really change the emotion of the other person you're with.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's like you mentioned partnership, right? So your boss, trying to get your boss to make a decision out of fear or loss aversion is maybe like slightly okay for you in the short term, but it's just going to hurt that long-term relationship because they're going to have resentment over that, the continuation of that, right? Especially if he did end up giving you a raise after.
And they'll be stingier, right? Like no one makes generous decisions. They've proven this in the lab. We are not generous when we feel afraid. We are not generous in scarcity mode. And so they might give you a little bump, but it's coming from a scarcity place. So they're going to be stingier.
Got it. So the second one is the approach, right? So you're on this other side of the street and obviously, COVID times and everything, but the most awkward thing that I've found is like you're waiting for the traffic light to hit, but you're both on the other side of the street, but like you don't know like when to wave, you don't know like when to make eye contact or smile because you don't know if that other person is looking at you or not, or sometimes they're looking down because they don't know either. Like what is kind of the rules for something like that? Or if there isn't really any rule, I'm curious to know, like when you do approach someone that you don't know, is it better to approach them from behind, the side, the front?
Always the front. Always the
Always
front.
the front.
We never like to approach from the side or behind, especially if you're going to physically touch someone, right? Like if you're physically touched like this, it's like we want to whip around and see who that was. So even like doing that wide circle around someone, even being like, hey, good to see you. But like even angling around towards them. And I'm a big fan of like, if I know someone sees me, I'm always the first greeter. Like I have taken it. I've decided in my life, I would rather risk being, it's like, I would rather risk being the first greeter and having them not see me than not greeting and having it be awkward for the next 5 minutes.
Right. That's true.
So, right. Like you got to make that decision. What's your risk? And I would much rather be like, hey, they didn't see me. Hey, they didn't see me. Hey, oh, they saw me. Hey.
Right.
I would much rather do that than I'm just going to wait. Are they looking at me? Are they looking at me? I'm not going to say, oh yeah. Hey, no, I know I saw you. I wasn't sure if that was you. Awkward, horrible, awkward.
Yes.
You're recovering. Right. Like you got to choose your risk there. So I would always rather be first grader. So I'm like I'm a big waver. Like I'm a big waver. Like I'm always hands up. Right. No matter where I am, bar, networking event, street. I'm like, hey, Judy. Hey, Sam, good to see you. my husband walks through the door. Hey, babe. Like, I'm always first greeter. And I think that by the way, that there's a lot of science. We talked about this in our last interview. We love to see the palm of someone's hands. We love palms. Palms are like the underrated part of our body. When we see a palm, we know they're not concealing something. We know that we're being acknowledged. We know that someone's being open, right? We hate a fist, right? So instinctively, we do not like seeing fists. That's why when we see a fist with someone, we're like, oh, they look so closed and angry. It's because it shows that I'm white knuckling. So it shows I have tension and anger. It may be concealment. Who knows what's in there? It's how we punch, right? Like we know that we could be injured that way. And so the answer is an open palm. So I'm open palming all the time. Like when we started this video, right? I was like, hi.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So it's almost out of like, yeah. So is evolutionary is the idea that it's a lot of that is just kind of survival instincts for us. It kind of translates to social life.
Or even like, yes, I think there's a lot of biology in there, but I also think a lot of it's learned, right? Like we know that when our friends greet us and people like us, they're open palming towards us all the time. They're like, oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. Come in for a hug. Hey, so how's it going? Tell me everything. Hey, like, so we have learned that when we like someone, we do lots of open palm gestures towards them. And when someone doesn't like us, what do? Closed, right? We don't see their hands at all. Maybe they're like this listening to us. Maybe their fists are crossed. Maybe they're like this. So we have learned that, this is positive and this is negative, or concealment is negative.
Got it. Man, I mean, every time you come on, there's so many things I learned that I realized even after 5 years, even the things that we've talked about, I just realized there's always practice that you need to do, refreshers that you need to do. First of all, I highly recommend people to check out the book Cues. First of all, where can they find that? And
Yes. So Cues, wherever books are sold. It also already got picked up internationally, which I'm so grateful for. So It should be international. I know it should be internationally available too. It's also being translated already. So I'm super excited about that. I also record the audiobook. If you feel like listening to me for another 7 hours, you're welcome to listen to the audiobook. And of course there's Kindle, and it should be in bookstores as well as on Amazon and in your country too.
I love it. Now, as a final question, I'm just obviously like I could talk about this for hours and hours, but is there a specific cue or something that you just feel most people listening to this today can take away to help create a positive, lasting impression in their next interaction, or help them with their careers or social life, dating life, anything that we didn't maybe touch on?
Yeah, I'll give one that's very current to the time. And it's an aspect of a cue I talked about, but I didn't get to talk about this part, which is space. We think about in person. We forget that space rules are also happening virtually, especially on our video calls, on our FaceTime calls. We are video calling now all the time, not only meetings, interviews, negotiations, but also FaceTiming and video calling on dates, right? Like sometimes that's our first impression on video. The same space rules apply. So right now I made sure, so I'm standing on a piece of tape because I know that the distance between my nose to this camera is more than 18 inches. The biggest mistake that people make is they break space rules on video. So they come on camera and they're 18 inches away. Now, if I were to do the entire interview like this, you'd be like, whoa, back up.
Right.
It's invasive. And so the biggest mistake we make is we hop on video or we get on a video call, and we're right in someone's intimate space. And they're like, ugh. So immediately they're triggering alarm bells. So the very first thing is, especially in your first impression, make sure that when your video pops on or you answer the phone, your nose is at least 18 inches away from the camera. 18 inches is nothing, right? Like if I 18 inches, that's like nothing, right? So even just a little bit farther, you're signaling you're in the personal zone, which is a safer place to be. If you're feeling intimate, that's when you can go a little closer, right? Like, tell me more, Sean, tell me more. And we know that. So that's a really easy one that I see people in their profile photos too. Just make sure 18 inches or more. 18 inches or more.
Right, because on camera, it also has a different distance, right? So like, I'm wondering now if I'm too far away sometimes.
You're perfect. You are perfect.
This is like this is a good measure. Okay.
It's also because I can see the top of your body. I can see if you're making gestures. So you'll notice also, like, I make sure that the camera hits right at my waist so that you can see most of my gestures. So the other reason secretly I want you to be more than 18 inches apart is that people can see your hand gestures.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, this is very helpful. I guess people can just take a snapshot of our angles right now and just see, this is like the right distance to make. So awesome, Vanessa. I really appreciate you coming on again and just sharing so much valuable insights, research that you've done, spending over 5 years, trying to research this book. I can't wait for people to check it out and love that it's already being translated, because I think more people around the world needs to hear it. How does that work with the audiobook, by the way, when it's translated? Is someone else read it, I guess?
Yeah, they hire other actors to read in the other language, which is crazy.
I love it. I love it.
Crazy. But I'm so
best
grateful.
of luck. This is amazing.
I'm so grateful for all your support with my work over the years. Thank you everyone for watching and being willing to talk about these cues. I think a lot of them are invisible and there's so many opportunities. So thank you for having me.
I love it.